After I lost my job, my sister yelled, "How am I supposed to pay my Porsche loan now?" My mother agreed, demanding I drain my life savings to cover the debt. My father handed me my bags and told me my sister deserved to live in this house more than I did. I kept quiet about the $60 million financial technology company in my name. I also kept quiet about my beachfront mansion in the Hamptons. That night changed everything for them. My name is Madeline, and I am 33 years old. Until last Tuesday, my family thought I was just a lowly accountant barely scraping by in the wealthy suburbs of Connecticut. When I walked through the front door and told them I had been laid off, they did not offer me a single word of comfort. Instead, they demanded my last dime. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only loved you for your wallet. Growing up, I was always the scapegoat, while my 29-year-old sister Brittany was the golden child. My mother Linda made sure everyone knew it. My parents constantly praised Brittany for her looks, her shopping habits, and her complete illusion of high society success. Meanwhile, they treated me like the family automated teller machine. For the past 4 years, I had maintained a carefully crafted cover story. I told them I worked a boring accounting job. The truth was, I was the founder and chief executive officer of a highly successful financial technology firm. I also secretly owned the property management company that subsidized 80% of the rent for the very house my parents lived in. I kept my wealth hidden because I knew exactly how greedy they were. On that rainy Tuesday evening, I decided it was time to test the waters. I walked into the sprawling living room, dripping wet from the storm outside. My mother Linda was reclining on the plush white sofa, sipping a glass of expensive red wine. Brittany sat across from her, rapidly tapping on her latest smartphone with her long manicured nails. Neither of them bothered to look up when I entered. "I lost my job today," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. The reaction was instantaneous. Brittany did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask what happened. Instead, she slammed her phone down and picked up her heavy keychain. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she threw the keys to her Porsche Cayenne across the marble coffee table. They slid and hit a crystal vase with a loud clatter. "Are you kidding me, Madeline?" she screamed, her face turning red. "How am I supposed to pay my car loan now? That loan was $1,500 a month. For the past 2 years, my mother had manipulated me into helping Brittany pay for it, claiming my sister needed a luxury vehicle to attract the right kind of social circles. I had paid it quietly through a blind trust, acting as a generous benefactor just to keep the peace. "I do not have a salary anymore, Brittany," I replied, staring blankly at the keys. "I cannot pay for your luxury vehicle." My mother Linda slammed her wine glass down onto the coaster. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at me. "How could you be so careless, Madeline?" she demanded. "You know your sister relies on that money. You have always lacked ambition, but losing a simple desk job is a new low even for you." "I was laid off, Mother," I said, keeping my composure. "The company downsized. It had nothing to do with my performance. I have no income right now to support myself, let alone pay for a car I do not even drive." Brittany stood up and crossed her arms, pacing around the Persian rug. "You are so selfish," she snapped. "My husband Terrence is going to be furious. He is a real estate agent and we have an image to maintain. He told me you were unreliable and he was absolutely right. What am I supposed to tell my friends? That my sister is a jobless loser who cannot even help her own family?" The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. She was 29 years old, married and entirely dependent on my hidden charity, yet she had the nerve to call me a loser. I looked at my mother, expecting at least a shred of parental decency. Instead, Linda sighed heavily and rubbed her temples as if my job loss was a massive inconvenience to her day. "Well, you have savings, do you not?" Linda asked, her tone dripping with entitlement. "You need to withdraw from your retirement accounts immediately. You can cash out your 401k. Brittany cannot lose that car. What would the neighbors think if a repossession truck showed up in our driveway? You need to fix this, Madeline." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. You want me to drain my life savings and pay massive early withdrawal penalties just so Brittany can drive a Porsche? It is the least you can do, Linda fired back, her voice sharp and authoritative. You live under this roof. You eat our food. You owe this family. Do not think you can just sit around here draining our resources while contributing nothing. The irony was staggering. They thought they owned this house. They thought they were the ones providing for me. They had absolutely no idea that the property management company they paid their highly discounted rent to was actually a shell corporation I owned. I was the one keeping a roof over their heads. I am not touching my savings for a car, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. Brittany let out a theatrical gasp. You see, Mom, I told you she was useless. She just wants to drag us down to her miserable level. Terrence was right about her. We should just kick her out and take her room. Terrence needs a home office anyway. Just then, my father Richard walked into the living room from his study. He had heard the entire conversation. Instead of defending me, he walked over to the hall closet and pulled out my old duffel bag. He tossed it at my feet. Your mother is right, Madeline, Richard said, his voice dripping with disappointment. Your sister deserves the space in this house more than you do. Terrence is closing big real estate deals and they need a proper home office. You are just taking up space. Get out. If you refuse to help your sister, then you are no longer welcome to enjoy the comforts of this family, Linda declared, pointing a manicured finger at the hallway. You can pack your things. You are leaving tonight. I stood there, letting their toxic demands wash over me. I did not shed a single tear. I did not beg for their understanding. For years I had played the quiet, obedient daughter, swallowing their insults and financing their fake affluent lifestyle. I had given them every opportunity to show a basic level of human decency. They had failed spectacularly. Are you throwing me out? I asked, wanting to hear them confirm it clearly. You threw yourself out the moment you decided to be a selfish failure, Linda replied coldly. Go pack your bags, Madeline. We do not tolerate dead weight in this house. I nodded slowly. I did not say another word. I picked up the duffel bag and walked up the stairs to gather my belongings. The game was over. The safety net was officially gone. It was time for them to face the real world, and I was going to make sure the landing was brutal. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to my lawyer, Cameron. I told him to cancel all anonymous subsidies for the Connecticut property and the Porsche loan. It was time to let the collections begin. I was only halfway up the staircase when the heavy oak front door swung open. In walked Terrence, my 31-year-old brother-in-law. He shook the rain off his designer trench coat and stepped into the foyer, acting as if he owned the entire estate. Terrence was a tall African-American man with a booming voice and a smile that he practiced in the mirror every morning. He worked as a real estate agent and loved to project the image of a highly successful self-made businessman. He wore custom-tailored suits and carried himself with an inflated sense of importance that perfectly matched my sister's endless vanity. Before anyone could say a word, Terrence aggressively shot his left arm out of his coat sleeve, deliberately adjusting his wrist. He wanted to make absolutely certain that the heavy gold Rolex catching the light from the chandelier did not go unnoticed. He tapped the glass face of the watch with a smug grin. Rough night out there in the market, he announced to the room, completely ignoring my presence on the stairs. But that is the price of the grind. Nothing a real man cannot handle when he is prepping to close a $2 million commercial property by Friday. Brittany immediately ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck and putting on a fake pout. Terrence, you will not believe the absolute disaster we are dealing with right now, she whined, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at me. Madeline lost her stupid little accounting job today. She is completely broke and she is flat out refusing to pay my car loan. Terrence stopped smiling. He slowly looked up the staircase and fixed his eyes on me. His expression morphed into a mask of pure disgust. He let out a loud theatrical sigh and shook his head as if my very existence was a personal insult to his success. Are you kidding me, Madeline? He demanded, his voice echoing through the high ceilings of the foyer. a grown woman acting like a total freeloader. I am out here grinding 14 hours a day, analyzing market trends and closing massive deals to provide a luxury lifestyle for your sister. And you cannot even hold down a basic desk job. I stood silent on the stairs, looking down at the shiny gold watch on his wrist. A cold wave of amusement washed over me. My corporate lawyer, Cameron, had already run a deep background financial check on Terrence months ago. I knew exactly how he financed his flashy lifestyle. That Rolex was not bought with real estate commissions. It was purchased using a predatory high-interest personal loan with a crushing annual percentage rate. In reality, Terrence had not closed a single property deal in over 6 months. His credit score was actively tanking, and he was silently drowning in debt. Yet here he was, standing in a house subsidized by my secret company, lecturing me about financial responsibility. "You know what your problem is, Madeline?" Terrence continued stepping closer to the bottom of the stairs and looking up at me with absolute contempt. "You have a poverty mindset. You do not know how to hustle. People like you get left behind because you expect handouts. You are dragging this entire family down with your dead weight." My mother, Linda, immediately chimed in from the living room. "Terrence is absolutely right, Madeline. He is a provider. He understands what it takes to survive in this economy. You should be taking notes instead of standing there looking pitiful." Terrence puffed out his chest, soaking in my mother's praise. He turned his attention to my father, Richard, who was still standing by the hallway closet. "Richard, sir, with all due respect, I need to be honest with you," Terrence said, using his most persuasive salesman voice. "I am out here building an empire for Brittany and my future children. I need a proper space to conduct my business. I need to host high-value clients and negotiate contracts. Madeline is currently taking up the largest master suite on the second floor. A jobless freeloader does not need a massive walk-in closet and a private balcony overlooking the gardens. Brittany and I need that room. We need to convert it into my executive home office immediately. It is completely unacceptable that a failure gets the best room in the house while the actual earners are cramped down the hall." I watched my father process this demand. Richard was a man who worshipped traditional patriarchal success. He loved the idea of a dominant male provider taking charge of the household. The fact that Terrence was spouting aggressive business jargon was all the convincing my father needed. "You make a very valid point, Terrence," Richard said, nodding slowly in agreement. "A man who provides for this family deserves the best resources we have to offer. It makes zero financial sense to waste our premium square footage on someone who brings absolutely zero value to this household." Richard marched past Terrence and stomped up the stairs toward me. His face was red with anger and misplaced authority. "Get into that room and pack your garbage right now," Richard ordered, pointing aggressively down the hall. "You are vacating that master suite tonight. Terrence and Brittany are taking it over. I will not have my successful son-in-law working out of a cramped guest room while you sit around doing nothing." I did not argue. I turned around and walked calmly into the master bedroom. I pulled my suitcase from the closet and began tossing my clothes inside. I did not pack the expensive bed sheets. I did not pack the high-end electronics or the luxury furniture. I only packed the cheap basic items I had bought years ago to maintain my cover story as a struggling accountant. Everything else in this house technically belonged to the property management firm that I owned. I was simply leaving my own furniture behind for my ungrateful family to borrow for a few more days. Within 10 minutes, I zipped up my suitcase and rolled it out into the hallway. Richard was waiting for me with his arms crossed. He did not even let me carry my own bag down the stairs. He grabbed the handle of my suitcase, yanking it roughly from my grip. He dragged it down the hardwood steps, the wheels bouncing loudly against the wood, and marched straight to the front door. He threw the door open, letting the cold, rainy wind whip into the foyer. With a harsh swing of his arm, Richard tossed my suitcase out onto the wet concrete of the front porch. I walked down the stairs slowly, maintaining my perfect composure. I reached the bottom step and looked at the four of them. Terrence was adjusting his fake Rolex with a victorious smirk. Brittany was leaning against him, looking at me like I was a piece of trash that had finally been taken out. Linda was swirling the last sip of her red wine, her face a portrait of narcissistic satisfaction. Richard pointed a rigid finger directly at my face. "You are a disgrace to my name," he declared, his voice completely devoid of any parental warmth. "You failed in your career. You failed your sister. And you failed me. Failures have no place in this house. Do not ever come crawling back here begging for our money." I looked my father straight in the eyes. "I will never ask you for a single cent," I replied, my voice eerily calm. "Have a wonderful night in your house." I stepped out onto the wet porch and Richard slammed the heavy oak door shut right behind me. The lock clicked loudly, echoing in the cold night air. I stood alone in the rain, but I was not crying. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and smiled. The countdown had officially started. The rain was coming down in sheets, soaking through my thin wool coat within seconds. I stood on the wet concrete of the front porch, listening to the heavy deadbolt click into place from the inside. My father had literally locked me out in a storm. A normal daughter might have collapsed onto the porch, clutching her knees and sobbing into the freezing rain. A normal person who had just lost her job and her home in the span of 20 minutes would be terrified of the future. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of panic. Instead, as the icy rain plastered my hair against my face, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The charade was finally over. I gripped the plastic handle of my scuffed suitcase. The wheels squeaked loudly against the wet pavement as I walked down the long, manicured driveway of the estate. I turned right at the end of the street, leaving the glowing windows of my parents' house behind. I walked past the sprawling, manicured lawns of the upscale Connecticut suburb. My family thought I was dragging my miserable life to a cheap motel or walking to a bus stop in the middle of a storm. They assumed I would be begging them for forgiveness by morning. They were entirely wrong. I walked exactly 2 blocks down to a quiet, secluded cul-de-sac surrounded by tall oak trees. Parked under the dim glow of a single street lamp was a matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Class AMG. It was the latest model, equipped with custom rims and a price tag that exceeded my parents' combined yearly income. I reached into the hidden inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a sleek electronic key fob. I pressed my thumb against the sensor. The heavy luxury SUV chirped twice, and the LED headlights flared to life, slicing through the dark, rainy night. I popped the trunk and tossed my cheap decoy suitcase inside. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the heavy armored door shut, instantly cutting off the sound of the raging storm outside. The cabin smelled of rich new leather and expensive cedar. I pressed the push-to-start button. The twin-turbo V8 engine roared to life with a deep, aggressive growl that sent a satisfying vibration through the steering wheel. I turned on the heated seats and let the luxurious warmth seep into my freezing skin. I tapped the digital dashboard console and navigated to my encrypted contacts list. I pressed the call button for Cameron. He was my corporate attorney, my co-founder, and the most ruthless legal mind on the East Coast. He picked up on the second ring. "Madeline." He answered, his voice crisp and professional, even at this late hour. "Tell me you are not still sitting in that toxic house pretending to be a broke accountant." "I am sitting in the G-Wagon," I replied, leaning back against the headrest. "The extraction is complete." Richard threw my bags out the front door, and Linda told me I was dead weight. Brittany threw a tantrum about her car loan, and Terrence demanded my bedroom for his fake real estate empire. They performed exactly as we predicted. Cameron let out a sharp, dry laugh over the speaker system. "I have to admit, their predictability is almost poetic. I assume you are ready to initiate the financial withdrawal, then?" "I am more than ready," I said, shifting the car into drive. "Cut off all anonymous payments through the LLC immediately. Start with the house. Notify the property management firm that Apex Horizon Holdings will no longer be subsidizing 80% of the monthly lease for that property. Let their rent reset to the actual market value effective on the first of the month. I want the updated invoice mailed directly to Richard. Consider it done, Cameron replied, typing rapidly on his keyboard. What about your sister's luxury vehicle? Stop the automatic routing for the Porsche Cayenne I ordered, navigating the heavy SUV out of the cul-de-sac and onto the main road. Let the auto financing company know that the anonymous guarantor account is officially closed. Brittany is entirely responsible for the $1,500 monthly payment starting tomorrow. Let us see how long she can drive that car before the repossession agents come knocking. Cameron hummed in agreement. The auto loan is going to default fast. I ran the latest credit check on Brittany and Terrence this afternoon. They are currently maxed out on 4 different premium credit cards. Their debt-to-income ratio is an absolute disaster. Speaking of your brother-in-law, I uncovered the details regarding that flashy Rolex he has been parading around. I smiled, watching the windshield wipers push the heavy rain away. Let me guess. A predatory subprime loan with a ridiculous interest rate. Exactly, Cameron confirmed. He took out a $30,000 personal loan with a 24% annual percentage rate just to maintain his image. But that is the least of his problems, Madeline. I dug into his real estate brokerage activities. Terrence is not closing any commercial deals. He is currently under investigation by the state licensing board for commingling client escrow funds. He has been taking earnest money deposits from first-time homebuyers and using the cash to fund his own lifestyle. The board is preparing to strip his license and hand the case over to the authorities for wire fraud. The sheer stupidity of my brother-in-law never ceased to amaze me. He was standing in my house lecturing me about a poverty mindset while actively committing federal crimes. Do not interfere with the state investigation I instructed merging onto the highway entrance ramp. Let Terrence dig his own grave. When the authorities come for him, I want him to have absolutely zero financial backing to hire a defense attorney. Let the entire family sink under the weight of their own arrogance. Are you heading to your penthouse in the city? Cameron asked, changing the subject to logistics. No, I am driving straight to the beach mansion in the Hamptons, I replied, pressing down on the accelerator and feeling the raw power of the engine push the car forward. I need a change of scenery. Besides, we have the final board meeting for the new cybersecurity acquisition tomorrow morning. I will conduct the video conference from the home office overlooking the ocean. I will send the finalized merger documents to your secure server tonight, Cameron said. Enjoy the drive, Madeline. You earned this victory. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. The highway stretched out before me, slick with rain, but brightly lit by the street lamps. I turned up the premium sound system, letting a heavy bass track fill the cabin. I had spent 4 grueling years playing the role of the quiet, submissive failure just to protect my assets from a family that viewed me as an open bank account. I endured their relentless insults, their psychological manipulation, and their blatant favoritism. They wanted to kick me out into the cold, believing I would be utterly destroyed without their so-called protection. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured their luxurious lifestyle by getting rid of the useless daughter. But they had just severed the only lifeline keeping them from total financial ruin. I gripped the leather steering wheel tightly, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time all evening. The game of pretending was over. I was driving toward my multi-million-dollar sanctuary, and they were sitting in a house they could no longer afford. I whispered into the quiet luxury of the car cabin. Time to pull the net. The storm faded into a light drizzle as I crossed the state line into New York. The heavy tires of the G-Class glided smoothly over the empty highway toward the eastern tip of Long Island. 2 hours later, I pulled up to a massive wrought iron gate. I pressed a button on my console, and the gate swung open silently, revealing the winding driveway of my $4 million beachfront estate in the Hamptons. I parked the luxury vehicle in the heated 3-car garage and grabbed my cheap scuffed duffel bag. I unlocked the custom glass front door using a biometric scanner. As soon as I stepped inside, the smart home system recognized my presence. The floor-to-ceiling automated blinds slowly retracted, revealing a panoramic view of the dark, churning Atlantic Ocean. Soft ambient lighting illuminated the imported Italian marble floors and the minimalist modern artwork hanging on the walls. I walked into the massive gourmet kitchen, poured myself a glass of aged Cabernet, and stood by the window. I took a deep breath of the ocean air filtering through the ventilation system. The suffocating weight of my parents' house was completely gone. I was finally home in the sanctuary I had built with my own bare hands. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of waves crashing against the private shoreline. I discarded the cheap clearance rack clothes I had been forced to wear for the past 4 years to maintain my cover story. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet and pulled out a pristine, tailored designer suit. I slipped on a pair of diamond stud earrings and fastened a luxury watch around my wrist. Looking into the full-length mirror, I finally recognized the woman staring back at me. I was not a lowly, struggling accountant. I was a corporate titan. I took my premium espresso up to the second-floor executive home office. The room featured soundproof glass walls overlooking the beach and a massive mahogany desk equipped with multiple high-resolution monitors. I logged into my secure corporate server and initiated the encrypted video conference. Within seconds, the screen populated with the faces of my board of directors. Cameron sat at the head of the virtual table looking sharp in his usual dark suit. "Good morning, everyone," I announced, taking my seat at the desk. "Let us bypass the pleasantries and get straight to the acquisition strategy. We have a $60 million valuation to protect, and I want the integration of the new cybersecurity firm finalized before the next quarter." For the next hour, I commanded the room with absolute authority. We discussed hostile takeover metrics, venture capital allocations, and international expansion protocols. My executives reported robust profit margins and unprecedented user growth for our financial technology platform. I made rapid, calculated decisions, cutting underperforming departments and authorizing a massive capital injection into our artificial intelligence security division. I was entirely in my element. There was no hesitation and no weakness. When the meeting officially concluded, the other board members logged off, leaving only Cameron and me on the secure line. Cameron leaned back in his leather office chair and smiled through the screen. "You look like a completely different person today, Madeline," he observed. "It is amazing what shedding 200 pounds of toxic family weight can do for your complexion." I took a sip of my espresso. "I feel like I can finally breathe, Cameron. The charade is officially over." Speaking of the charade, Cameron said, his tone shifting back to business. "I ran another routine sweep on your personal credit profile this morning just to be absolutely certain. Everything is locked down tight. I just wanted to make sure Terrence did not try to pull another desperate identity theft stunt now that his real estate facade is crumbling." I felt a cold, familiar anger tighten my chest at the mention of my brother-in-law. That incident was the exact reason I had faked my own financial ruin 4 years ago. "He will not get past the security freezes we put in place," I replied, staring out at the ocean. 4 years ago, my company was just starting to turn a massive profit. I had been foolishly generous back then, paying for family dinners and buying expensive gifts. Terrence noticed my rising income. While I was visiting my parents for a holiday dinner, he sneaked into my purse and stole my social security number from a tax document I had brought for my father to review. Within a month, Terrence had secretly opened 3 premium credit cards in my name. He maxed them out entirely, buying designer suits, luxury watches, and renting high-end sports cars to impress his fake real estate clients. I only found out when my perfect credit score suddenly plummeted. When I confronted the family with the undeniable proof of his fraud, their reaction had shattered my heart. Instead of apologizing, Terrence had smirked and called it a temporary family loan. My mother, Linda, had actively defended him. She told me I was being selfish and dramatic. She said families share their wealth, and that calling the police would ruin Brittany and her marriage. My father, Richard, had looked me in the eyes and ordered me to take the financial hit. He demanded I pay off the stolen debt myself to protect the family reputation. They expected me to just swallow the betrayal and become their permanent funding source. That was the day I realized they did not love me. They only loved what they could extract from me. Instead of arguing, I took immediate covert action. I hired Cameron to aggressively freeze all my personal credit. I legally transferred every single asset I owned into anonymous offshore shell companies and blind trusts. Then I went back to my parents' house and staged a massive emotional breakdown. I told them I had been fired, I was bankrupt, and I was drowning in insurmountable debt. I begged them for financial help just to see what they would do. Their reaction was violently cruel. They immediately withdrew all affection. They mocked my supposed failure and treated me like absolute garbage. They allowed me to live in the house only because they needed a live-in maid and someone to target their daily frustrations on. They completely forgot I was a financial asset and started treating me like a burden. I played the role perfectly, allowing them to expose their true narcissistic colors while I secretly built a $60 million empire right under their noses. My phone suddenly vibrated on the mahogany desk, bringing me back to the present. The caller ID flashed brightly on the screen. It was my mother, Linda. The financial dominoes had finally started to fall in Connecticut. I looked at Cameron through the video feed and smiled a cold, calculated smile. "Cameron," I said, picking up the vibrating phone, "the fallout has officially begun. Let us see how much they panic when the money completely dries up." I pressed the green accept button on my phone and put the call on speaker, setting the device carefully on the polished mahogany desk. Cameron leaned forward on his side of the video feed, watching with silent anticipation. I did not say hello, I simply let the line open. "Madeline," the sharp, piercing voice of my mother blared through the pristine acoustics of my home office. "It is about time you answered your phone. I have been calling you all morning. Not a single question about where I had slept last night. Not a single inquiry about whether I was safe from the raging storm they had thrown me into. She did not care if I was sitting in a warm room or shivering under a bridge. Her entire existence revolved around her own convenience and the unyielding demands of her golden child. For decades, she had used guilt as her primary weapon, training me to apologize for situations I never created. "I am listening," I said, keeping my tone completely neutral. "You caused an absolute disaster last night," Linda scolded, her voice dripping with venomous indignation. "Brittany has been crying uncontrollably since you left. She is incredibly stressed, Madeline. Your selfish little stunt about losing your job and refusing to pay her car loan has sent her into a severe panic attack. Terrence had to cancel his morning appointments just to comfort her. You have completely disrupted their peace of mind." I stared out the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, watching a seagull glide effortlessly over the crashing ocean waves. The sheer audacity of her words was almost clinical in its narcissistic delusion. I had supposedly ruined their peace of mind by being fired and becoming homeless. "I am terribly sorry that my unemployment is so inconvenient for Brittany," I replied, my voice devoid of any actual sympathy. "How exactly do you expect me to fix her emotional distress?" Linda sighed heavily. A sharp exhalation of breath, meant to signal her supreme patience with my supposed incompetence. "It is very simple, Madeline," she instructed, shifting into her dictatorial tone. "I spoke with Terrence this morning. He suggested that the only way to repair the psychological damage you inflicted on your sister is to get her out of this toxic environment. They need to clear their heads. They need a luxury vacation to St. Bart's immediately." "A luxury vacation to St. Bart's," I repeated, letting the absurdity of the demand echo in my quiet office. "Yes," Linda snapped, annoyed that I was making her repeat herself. "And since you are the one who caused this unnecessary trauma, you are going to finance the trip." Terrence calculated the costs for first-class flights, a private villa, and a premium resort package. "It comes out to roughly $25,000. I glanced at the video screen. Cameron had his hand covering his mouth, visibly trying to suppress a burst of laughter. "I do not have $25,000, Mother," I stated calmly. "I told you last night I lost my job. I have no income. Do not play games with me, Madeline." Linda hissed, her voice rising in pitch. "We already discussed this. You have a 401k retirement account from your boring little desk job. You are going to call your brokerage firm right now and request an emergency hardship withdrawal. A hardship withdrawal? I asked, raising an eyebrow, even though she could not see me. Yes, Linda confirmed proudly, as if she had just solved world hunger. You will tell them you have a family emergency. You will take the early withdrawal penalty, and you will wire the $25,000 directly into Terrence's checking account by the end of the business day. They need to book the flights before the premium suites are sold out. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, resting my hands on my lap. The psychological manipulation was a textbook case of gaslighting. She was demanding that I liquidate my supposed retirement savings, accept a massive financial penalty from the Internal Revenue Service, and hand the cash over to my fraudulent brother-in-law so my sister could sip margaritas on a white sand beach. And she framed it all as my moral obligation, as if I owed them my very survival. What happens if I do not cash out my retirement fund? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Linda gasped loudly, a theatrical display of maternal horror. Then you are dead to this family, Madeline. If you refuse to make this right, you will never step foot in our house again. You will be entirely cut off. Do not think you can come crawling back when you realize how cruel and difficult the real world is. We are giving you one final chance to prove your loyalty to your sister and to us. Withdraw the money today, or we are done with you permanently. The threat was supposed to terrify me. It was designed to trigger the deep-seated fear of abandonment they had programmed into me since childhood. They expected me to break down crying and beg for their forgiveness. But sitting in my $4 million mansion looking at the vast, endless ocean, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, chilling clarity. They had no power over me anymore. The invisible chains had completely dissolved. "Are you done speaking?" I asked. Linda paused, clearly caught off guard by the icy detachment in my voice. "What did you say to me?" "I asked if you were done speaking," I repeated, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "Because I want to make sure you hear me perfectly." "You listen to me, you ungrateful little," Linda started to shout, but I cut her off immediately. "No, you listen to me," I commanded, my voice echoing off the soundproof glass walls. "I am not cashing out a single cent for Brittany. I am not funding a vacation for Terrence. I am not subsidizing your luxurious delusions for another second. If your golden child is stressed about her car loan and her lifestyle, she can get a job. If your son-in-law wants to go to St. Bart's, he can use his own money instead of scamming his real estate clients." "Madeline, how dare you!" Linda shrieked, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria. "You will transfer that money right now, or I swear to God." "Figure it out yourself," I said coldly. I reached out and pressed the red button ending the call. The silence that rushed back into the home office was magnificent. It was the heavy, beautiful sound of absolute freedom. I looked back at the computer monitor. Cameron was staring at me with a wide, triumphant grin. "That was arguably the most satisfying conversation I have ever witnessed," Cameron said, leaning forward. "You completely dismantled her." "She gave me the perfect exit," I replied, picking up my espresso cup. "They pushed all their chips onto the table thinking I would fold out of fear. Now they have absolutely nothing to leverage against me." Cameron typed a few commands into his terminal. "Well, you might want to brace yourself, Madeline. Because while you were on that call, my security software flagged an incoming communication on your secondary line. Terrence is calling you. And based on the financial trap we just set for him, I guarantee he is not calling to apologize." "Let it go to voicemail," I instructed, turning my chair to face the ocean view again. "Let him stew in his own panic. We will deal with his threats when I am ready. For now, I am going to enjoy the view." I swiveled my ergonomic leather chair back toward the massive curved monitor on my desk. Cameron had already routed the audio file from my secondary decoy phone directly to our secure encrypted server. My decoy phone was the outdated model I used exclusively for family communications to maintain my facade as a struggling accountant. Play the message, I instructed, leaning forward and resting my chin on my intertwined fingers. Let us hear exactly how desperate my brother-in-law has become in the last 12 hours. Cameron pressed a key on his end. The pristine acoustics of my home office amplified the heavy breathing and background street noise of the recording. Then Terrence began to speak. His voice was laced with an aggressive, arrogant sneer that I had grown to despise over the years. "Listen to me very carefully," Madeline Terrence commanded through the audio file. "Your little stunt last night was cute, but the adults are talking now. Linda just told me you hung up on her and refused to cash out your retirement fund for Brittany. You think you can just walk away from your obligations to this family because you got fired from some pathetic desk job? You are dead wrong." I kept my expression entirely neutral as the recording continued. "I am a respected real estate broker." Madeline Terrence boasted, his voice echoing through the room. "I have connections all over this state. I know people who hire and fire nobodies like you every single day. You owe me $5,000 right now. Consider it a late fee for the emotional damage you caused my wife and the inconvenience of me having to rearrange my corporate schedule to deal with your childish tantrum." A sharp scoff escaped my lips. $5,000. He was trying to extort a measly $5,000 while wearing a fake Rolex purchased with a high-interest predatory loan. "If you do not wire that exact amount into my checking account by noon today." Terrence threatened, his tone shifting from arrogant to malicious. "I am going online. I have thousands of high-value connections on LinkedIn. I am going to write a very detailed public post about your sudden termination. I will tell the entire corporate world that you were not downsized. I will say you were fired for gross misconduct and petty theft. I will tell every recruiter in Connecticut that you were caught stealing from the petty cash drawer and embezzling office supplies." Cameron shook his head in absolute disbelief on the video screen. "Good luck ever finding another accounting job when your name is permanently tied to workplace theft," Terrence sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You will be blacklisted across the entire East Coast. You will not even be able to get a job flipping burgers. You have until noon, Madeline. Send the $5,000 or your professional reputation is completely destroyed. Do not test me. I always win." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. The silence in my office felt electric. Terrence had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to annihilate his entire existence. He thought he was intimidating a helpless, terrified former accountant. He had no idea he had just left a recorded extortion threat on the secure server of a multi-million-dollar financial technology chief executive officer. "Well," Cameron said, leaning back and folding his arms, "that is textbook extortion. It is a clear-cut felony in the state of Connecticut. He just threatened to commit libel and intentionally inflict economic harm unless you meet his financial demands. Save that audio file in 3 separate encrypted locations." I ordered, my voice cold and precise. "Make sure the metadata includes the exact timestamp and originating phone number. When the time comes, I want the district attorney to have a perfectly packaged piece of evidence." "Already done." Cameron confirmed, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "I am appending it to the growing legal dossier we have against him. Now I want to hit him where it actually hurts," I said, standing up and walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window. "Terrence loves to brag about his real estate empire. He uses that fake status to manipulate my parents and look down on everyone else. I want to know exactly what is happening behind the curtain of his professional life." I turned back to the screen and looked directly at my lawyer. "Cameron, I want you to launch a full-scale investigation into his real estate license. Pull every public record, every transaction history, and every complaint filed against him with the state licensing board." Cameron smiled a predatory grin that made him the best corporate lawyer in the business. "I already started digging this morning, but I will deploy our private investigators to go deeper." "What exactly are we looking for?" "Look into his escrow accounts," I instructed. "Real estate agents who live beyond their means always dip into client funds when they get desperate. If he is carrying maxed-out credit cards and taking out 24% interest personal loans for his watches, He is definitely mismanaging his business finances. I want to know if he has been commingling earnest money deposits. I want to know if he has any pending disciplinary hearings. I want his entire professional life dissected under a microscope. You want to strip him of his license, Cameron concluded. I want to completely eradicate his ability to ever scam another person. I corrected him sharply. Terrence operates on the illusion of success. Once we expose him to the licensing board and the authorities, his entire identity will collapse. My parents revere him because they think he is a wealthy provider. When they find out he is a broke fraud facing felony extortion and embezzlement charges, the psychological shock will break them. I will have a preliminary report on his brokerage activities by tomorrow morning, Cameron promised. I will also contact our forensic accountant to trace any irregular banking patterns tied to his professional license number. We will build a concrete case against him before he even realizes he is under attack. Excellent, I said, walking back to my desk. Terrence thinks he controls the narrative. He thinks he can bully me into submission for $5,000. Let him post whatever garbage he wants on LinkedIn. It will only add to the defamation lawsuit we will file against him right before the criminal charges hit. I disconnected the video call and picked up my espresso. The rain had completely stopped outside my Hamptons estate. The morning sun was beginning to break through the gray clouds, casting a brilliant light over the ocean. My family had spent years breaking me down to build themselves up. They had thrown me out into the storm thinking I would drown, but they had severely miscalculated. I was not just surviving the storm, I was the storm, and Terrence had just guaranteed that he would be the first one struck by lightning. 72 hours after I was thrown out into the rain, my decoy phone illuminated the polished mahogany of my home office desk. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let it ring 4 times before I finally pressed the green button. I did not speak. I simply leaned back in my chair and waited for him to break the silence. Madeline Richard barked through the speaker, but his usual commanding tone was entirely gone. His voice was trembling tight with a poorly concealed panic that I had never heard from him before. Something is completely wrong with the property management firm. I need you to look at a legal document right now. You are an accountant. You deal with numbers. I need you to tell me this is a clerical error. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. I am no longer an accountant for you, Richard. You made that perfectly clear when you dragged my suitcase out the front door. Why do you not ask your highly successful son-in-law to review the document? Terrence is a real estate expert after all. Terrence is out showing properties. Richard snapped a blatant lie to cover his rising anxiety. Please, Madeline. A certified courier just handed your mother a letter from Apex Horizon Holdings. They are claiming our monthly housing payment is increasing from $1,300 to $6,500, effective on the 1st of the month. They are stating our subsidized lease agreement has been formally terminated. I could hear Linda pacing heavily in the background, her voice echoing sharply. Tell her to find a lawyer, Richard. It is extortion. They cannot legally raise our mortgage by 500% overnight. We have rights. I will not let some faceless corporate landlord bully us out of our prestigious neighborhood. I smiled at the sheer scale of their financial delusion. My father had spent the last 3 years living a lie and feeding his own ego while I quietly footed the bill. You do not have a mortgage, Richard, I stated calmly, measuring every word. You have a lease. You have been a tenant for 3 years. What are you talking about? Richard demanded, his breath hitching. I refinanced this house. I negotiated a brilliant restructuring plan with the bank when the market dipped. We own this property. You lost that property to foreclosure 3 years ago. I corrected him, my voice cutting through his massive ego like a surgical scalpel. You took out a massive second mortgage to fund a terrible investment strategy, and the bank came to collect. You were 60 days away from an eviction notice. You were terrified that your country club friends and your precious golden child Brittany would find out you were a complete financial failure. So you panicked. The line went dead silent. The only sound was Linda's frantic breathing. A private equity firm stepped in and bought the deed directly from the bank. I continued outlining the brutal reality of their situation. They allowed you to stay in the property as renters. But because your credit score was utterly destroyed and you could not afford the actual market rent of $6,500, a private anonymous guarantor stepped in. That guarantor paid 80% of your rent every single month for 36 months. You only paid $1,300 because someone else was secretly covering the remaining $5,200 just to keep a roof over your head. That is impossible. Richard stammered, completely abandoning his patriarchal authority. Who would pay over $60,000 a year anonymously to keep us in this house? I did, I replied. A sharp gasp erupted from the other end of the phone. It was Linda. She had clearly snatched the device from my father. You are lying, Madeline, Linda shrieked, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria. You are a broke, pathetic accountant. You just got fired. You do not have that kind of capital. You are making this up to scare us because you are bitter and jealous of your sister. I set my water glass down on the desk. Check the signature on the eviction warning you received 3 years ago, Linda. Check the corporate filings for Apex Horizon Holdings. I am the sole managing director of that limited liability company. I bought the house when Richard failed to provide for his family. I subsidized your luxurious suburban lifestyle because I pitied you. But 3 nights ago, you both made it abundantly clear that my financial charity was no longer required. You told me I was dead weight. You told me failures have no place in your home. So I removed my funding. Madeline. Please, Richard begged, his voice breaking completely. His pride was entirely shattered. You cannot do this. We do not have $6,500 a month. We do not even have half of that. If the rent resets to market value, we will be evicted. We will have nowhere to go. Where will Brittany and Terrence live? Terrence is a millionaire real estate broker. I reminded him, my tone dripping with freezing sarcasm. He wears a gold Rolex. He is closing a $2 million commercial property by Friday. Surely he can write a check to cover the rent for the master suite he demanded so aggressively. You know they do not have that kind of liquid cash, Linda cried, dropping her aggressive posture and resorting to pure desperation. Brittany needs stability right now. You cannot throw your own family out onto the street. We are your parents, Madeline. You owe us respect. I owe you exactly what you gave me, I replied. You threw me out into a freezing rainstorm and locked the door behind me. You chose to protect a predatory son-in-law and a spoiled sister over your own daughter. You wanted the house to yourselves. Now you have it. The full market rent is due in exactly 14 days. If the payment is short by a single cent, Apex Horizon Holdings will file a formal eviction notice with the county court. Madeline, wait, Richard pleaded. We can talk about this. You can come back home. We can work this out as a family. You do not own a home, Richard, I reminded him, shutting down his desperate negotiation. You are a tenant, and your landlord is done doing charity work. I pressed the end call button, disconnecting their frantic pleas. The silence returned to my home office. I leaned back and looked out at the ocean. The foundation of their fake wealthy lifestyle had just been completely demolished. The eviction clock was officially ticking, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. Exactly 48 hours after the eviction notice was delivered, my secure encrypted monitor pinged with a high-priority notification. Cameron appeared on the video feed looking incredibly satisfied. He took a sip of his black coffee and adjusted his tie. Madeline, Cameron announced, his voice carrying a sharp edge of victory. I have a live feed you are going to want to see. Our private investigator has eyes on your sister. The auto finance company did not waste a single second. When we pulled, the anonymous guarantor backing the Porsche Cayenne immediately fell into an unrecoverable default status. The repossession order was expedited and dispatched this morning. Put it on the main screen, I instructed, leaning back in my leather chair. The monitor switched to a high-definition video feed. The private investigator was parked discreetly across from an upscale luxury outdoor shopping promenade in Connecticut. Right in the center of the premium valet parking zone sat Brittany's pristine white Porsche Cayenne. A few moments later, the glass doors of a high-end designer boutique swung open. Out walked my sister. Brittany was completely in her element. She wore oversized designer sunglasses and carried 4 large shopping bags filled with items she had undoubtedly purchased using Terrence's rapidly maxing out credit cards. She was flanked by 2 of her equally superficial country club friends. She was gesturing wildly, clearly bragging about her fabulous life, her successful husband, and her supreme social status. I watched her glide toward the premium parking space, expecting to load her expensive purchases into her luxury sports utility vehicle. But before she could even press the unlock button on her key fob, a massive heavy-duty tow truck pulled aggressively into the lane. The yellow warning lights flashed brightly as the truck reversed at a rapid pace, stopping inches from the front bumper of the Porsche. 2 burly men in high-visibility vests jumped out of the truck. One of them carried a heavy metal hook and immediately dropped to the ground, sliding it under the front axle of the luxury vehicle. Even through the silent video feed, I could see the exact moment Brittany realized what was happening. She dropped her designer shopping bags right onto the concrete. She lunged forward, waving her manicured hands in the air and screaming at the repossession agents. Her 2 friends stood frozen in shock, exchanging confused and highly judgmental glances. Cameron unmuted the audio feed from the investigator's directional microphone. "Get your filthy hands off my car!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Do you have any idea who my husband is? He is a multi-million-dollar real estate broker. You are making a massive mistake. I will have you fired and sued for everything you own." The lead repossession agent did not even flinch. He pulled a thick clipboard from his vest and looked at her with utter indifference. "Are you Brittany?" he asked loudly enough for her friends and several passing shoppers to hear. "Yes, I am," she snapped, crossing her arms and trying to maintain her arrogant posture. "And you need to unhook my vehicle right now before I call the police." "Go ahead and call them, lady," the agent replied, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "This vehicle is officially property of the bank. The anonymous guarantor account was permanently closed 48 hours ago. The financing is in total default. We are repossessing the asset. Please step away from the tow truck." Brittany lost all color in her face. Her jaw dropped open. She looked back at her friends who were now whispering to each other and slowly stepping away from her as if poverty was a contagious disease. Her carefully constructed illusion of wealth was being publicly dismantled in the middle of a crowded luxury mall. "No," Brittany wailed, her voice losing all its previous authority. "You do not understand. There is a mistake. Let me call my sister. She pays for this. She is supposed to pay for this." The agent ignored her entirely. He signaled his partner. The hydraulic winch roared to life. Within seconds, the white Porsche Cayenne was hoisted into the air, its front wheels lifting off the pavement. Brittany stood completely helpless, tears of sheer humiliation streaming down her face as the tow truck secured the vehicle and drove away, leaving her standing in the middle of the parking lot with nothing but her dropped shopping bags. My office remained perfectly quiet. I watched the screen as Brittany frantically dug into her designer purse and pulled out her smartphone. 3 seconds later, my decoy phone began to ring. The caller identification flashed her name in bright red letters. "Take the video feed down," I told Cameron. "I want to give her my full and undivided attention." I picked up the phone and accepted the call. I did not say hello. Madeline Brittany screamed so loudly that the speaker distorted. "You ruined my life. They just took my car. They towed my Porsche right in front of everyone. My friends saw the whole thing. I am humiliated. Do you have any idea what you just did to my reputation?" I listened to her unhinged sobbing, completely unfazed by her emotional breakdown. She was not crying because she had lost a vehicle. She was crying because her fake social status had been violently stripped away and exposed as a total fraud. "Call the bank right now!" Brittany demanded, her voice turning vicious and entitled. "Call them and authorize the payment. You owe me an apology. You are going to fix this and you are going to pay the impound fees." I need my car back today. I took a deep, slow breath of the ocean air filtering through my office. I let her finish her frantic demands before I finally spoke. The car is in your name. I stated, my voice radiating absolute freezing indifference. The loan is in your name. I lost my job. Where exactly do you expect me to get the money? You find the money! Brittany shrieked, stomping her foot so hard I could hear the impact through the phone. You figure it out. You use your savings. You take out a loan. You cannot do this to me. I cannot be seen walking around like some poor person. How am I supposed to get home? I am sure a highly successful woman like yourself can figure out public transportation, I replied. Or perhaps your millionaire husband can pick you up in his non-existent private jet. I hate you, Brittany screamed, her voice breaking into a guttural sob. You are a jealous, bitter failure. You did this because you want me to be as miserable as you are. I did this because I am no longer funding your delusions. I corrected her, my tone slicing through her tantrum like a blade. You demanded I leave the house because I was a failure. You agreed when they threw me out into the rain. You wanted me gone. Now I am gone, and so is my wallet. Have fun walking, Brittany. I pressed the end call button, terminating the connection before she could scream another word. I placed the phone face down on my desk. The silence in the room was a beautiful, heavy testament to my absolute control. Brittany was currently stranded at a shopping mall holding bags of clothes she could not afford, with no car to drive and no friends willing to associate with a verified fraud. Her golden child status had just collided with cold, hard reality, and this was only the beginning of the financial avalanche. 24 hours after Brittany lost her beloved luxury vehicle, my parents hit their absolute breaking point. The financial walls were rapidly closing in on them, and their mounting panic quickly mutated into explosive, irrational anger. Richard and Linda simply could not accept the fact that they were being evicted and stripped of their highly subsidized suburban lifestyle. In their deeply delusional minds, I was just a bitter, unemployed accountant who was intentionally withholding money out of pure spite. They refused to believe that their entire existence was collapsing because of their own cruel actions. They decided to take matters into their own hands to fix the problem. They aggressively drove to the downtown corporate plaza where they believed I had been working for the past 4 years. My decoy job had been located in a mid-level commercial building right in the center of the financial district. When my parents angrily marched through the heavy revolving glass doors, they were completely blind to the massive multi-million-dollar renovations that had recently taken place. The old accounting firm logo they expected to see was entirely gone. In its place was a sleek brushed steel emblem for Vertex Financial Technologies. Linda marched straight up to the main reception desk, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the newly installed imported marble floor. Richard flanked her, puffing out his chest and attempting to project the false authority of a wealthy patriarch who demanded immediate service. I demand to speak to your human resources director this very second, Linda barked at the impeccably dressed receptionist. Or better yet, get the branch manager out here right now. I am the mother of Madeline. I know you people laid her off a few days ago, and we are here to officially discuss her severance package. She was wrongfully terminated from this firm, and you owe this family significant financial compensation. The receptionist, a sharp and highly trained professional named Vanessa, did not even flinch. She looked at my red-faced mother with absolute corporate detachment. She typed a few keys on her sleek terminal, accessing the global employee directory, and looked back up with a perfectly neutral expression. I am very sorry, madam, but there must be some profound confusion, Vanessa stated politely but firmly. There is no human resources director for an accounting firm located in this facility. That particular firm went bankrupt and relocated 2 months ago. You are currently standing in the global corporate headquarters of Vertex Financial Technologies. Richard slammed his heavy hand down on the pristine reception desk, leaning forward to physically intimidate her. Do not play corporate semantics with me, young lady, Richard warned, his voice booming across the quiet lobby. My daughter Madeline worked in this exact building. She told us directly that she lost her job here earlier this week. You people threw her out into the street, and now her younger sister is suffering because of your ridiculous corporate restructuring. I demand a massive payout. Massive. Tell your boss to come down to this lobby right now, or I am calling my lawyers to sue this entire company. Vanessa stared at my father, completely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. She adjusted her posture and met his angry glare. Sir Vanessa replied, her voice dropping to a freezing professional register. I do not think you comprehend the reality of your situation. Nobody threw anyone out. Madeline is not an employee here. She is the founder and the chief executive officer of Vertex Financial Technologies. Her private equity firm just bought this entire commercial building last month in a total cash transaction. She does not report to a manager. She owns the property you are currently standing on. The silence that followed her statement was absolute. Richard and Linda completely froze. The color instantly drained from my mother's face as she slowly looked around the expansive, ultra-modern lobby. She finally took in the high-tech biometric security gates, the armed private security detail, and the expensive modern art hanging on the walls. The sheer magnitude of the wealth surrounding them was undeniable, but their highly narcissistic brains simply could not process the truth. They could not accept that the daughter they had abused, degraded, and branded a total failure was actually a corporate titan. So their minds immediately constructed a disgusting, desperate alternative narrative to protect their fragile egos. That is a blatant lie, Linda shrieked, her voice echoing loudly and drawing the attention of several passing executives. Madeline is an ugly, talentless dropout. She is completely incompetent. She could never build a technology company like this. I know exactly what is going on here. She is sleeping with the actual owner. Richard nodded vigorously, actively latching onto the toxic delusion to save his pride. Exactly. My daughter is nothing but a shameless mistress. She is playing house with some wealthy old billionaire who bought this building, and he is letting her pretend to be an executive just to keep her quiet in bed. How absolutely disgusting. She sold her body and now she thinks she can cut off her own family. Go tell whatever rich old man she is sleeping with that we want our cut of the money. We are her parents, and we are entitled to a piece of this real estate. Vanessa did not entertain their unhinged screaming for another second. She calmly reached under her desk and pressed the silent panic button. Within moments, 4 heavily built private security guards emerged from the elevator bank and quickly surrounded my aggressive parents. You are trespassing on private corporate property, Vanessa informed them, pointing a firm finger toward the revolving doors. You need to leave the premises immediately, or these gentlemen will physically escort you to the local police precinct for disturbing the peace. Richard tried to shout another empty legal threat, but the largest security guard grabbed him firmly by the shoulder and forcibly guided him toward the exit. Linda stumbled after him, frantically adjusting her expensive coat and screaming vile obscenities about my supposed billionaire sugar daddy. They were literally tossed out onto the cold city sidewalk, completely humiliated and totally empty-handed. Sitting safely in my oceanfront home office in the Hamptons, I watched the entire lobby altercation unfold through the live high-definition security feed. Cameron was on the split monitor next to the security window, shaking his head in absolute disgust. They really would rather believe you are a prostitute than admit you are a self-made millionaire. Cameron noted, his tone laced with genuine revulsion. It is actually pathological. I took a slow sip of my hot espresso, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. It is called a narcissistic injury. Cameron, I explained, keeping my eyes on the screen as my parents angrily argued with each other on the sidewalk outside my corporate headquarters. Their fragile egos simply cannot survive in a reality where I am superior to them in every conceivable way. They have to invent a sick fantasy to protect their own superiority complex. It is the only way they can cope with their massive failure as parents. But let them believe whatever bizarre story they want to invent. Their delusions will not stop the eviction proceedings. Cameron nodded, typing a rapid command into his legal system. The eviction timer is still aggressively ticking, Madeline. They have exactly 12 days left before the county sheriffs arrive to forcibly remove them from the Connecticut property. I smiled, closing the security feed on my monitor. Perfect. Let them spend the next 12 days wondering why my imaginary sugar daddy is kicking them out onto the street. Their punishment is entirely self-inflicted, and I am going to enjoy every single second of their collapse. The days ticked down toward their absolute eviction, and the tension inside the Connecticut house reached a boiling point. I did not need to guess what was happening behind those closed doors. Because my property management firm legally owned the smart home security system installed on the premises, I had full access to the encrypted audio feeds in the common areas. Sitting in my Hamptons estate, I instructed Cameron to monitor the living room channel. The internal collapse of my family was about to become my favorite evening entertainment. Through the high-fidelity speakers of my computer, I listened to Terrence attempting to pacify my frantic parents. His booming voice echoed through the hallway, dripping with that signature fake bravado he used to mask his profound incompetence. "I need everyone to calm down right now," Terrence announced, clapping his hands together. "Richard, sir. I told you I have this situation completely under control. That commercial property deal I have been negotiating is closing on Friday morning. My commission alone is going to be over $80,000. I will personally write a check to that property management company and cover a full year of rent in advance. We are not getting evicted. I am the provider of this family and I protect my own." "Oh, thank God," Linda gasped, her voice thick with desperate relief. "You see, Richard? I told you Terrence would save us. Madeline is probably laughing in some cheap motel thinking she ruined us, but we have a real man in the house." Brittany chimed in her tone, returning to its usual arrogant pitch. "Exactly, Mom. Terrence is going to fix everything, and once we get the house secured, I am going to sue Madeline for the emotional distress she caused when she let my vehicle get repossessed." I smiled, taking a sip of my wine. They were completely insulated by their own shared delusions, but their comforting fantasy lasted exactly 12 more minutes. At precisely 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the front doorbell chimed. I watched the security feed as Richard walked to the foyer and opened the heavy oak door. A certified legal courier stood on the porch holding a thick manila envelope sealed with red tamper-proof tape. The courier asked for Richard by name, handed over the package, and walked away without another word. Richard carried the heavy envelope back into the living room. "Who is sending us certified mail?" Linda asked, her voice tightening with renewed anxiety. "Is it the eviction lawyers again?" "I do not know," Richard muttered, tearing open the thick paper. "There is no return address." Cameron and I watched in absolute silence as Richard pulled out a stack of official documents. These were the exact documents Cameron had anonymously compiled and dispatched earlier that morning. They were not from my company. They were directly from the State of Connecticut Real Estate Commission and the Financial Crimes Division. "What does it say?" Richard Terrence asked, his voice entirely too casual. Richard did not answer immediately. He was reading the first page and I could practically hear his heart drop into his stomach. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling with a dangerous mix of horror and violent rage. "Terrence," Richard whispered, staring at the paper. "What is a notice of imminent license revocation?" The audio feed picked up the sound of Terrence choking on his breath. The slick, confident real estate broker suddenly went completely rigid. "Sir, I do not know what you are reading, but there has to be a clerical error. The state board makes mistakes all the time." Richard flipped to the next page, his hands shaking violently. "This is not a clerical error, Terrence. These are bank statements. These are copies of your professional escrow accounts. It says here you are under active investigation for subprime fraud and wire embezzlement." "No, no, no," Linda shrieked, snatching the papers from her husband. "That is impossible. Terrence is a millionaire. He is closing a commercial deal on Friday." "There is no commercial deal." "Linda," Richard roared, his voice booming with absolute fury, "read the financial summary. He has not closed a single property in 7 months. He has been taking earnest money deposits from first-time home buyers and transferring the cash directly into his personal checking account. He stole over $100,000 from innocent clients." Brittany let out a piercing, high-pitched scream. Terrence, tell them this is a lie. Tell them this is a setup. Madeline probably faked these documents to frame you. But Terrence could not blame me for this. The state seals and official bank watermarks were undeniable. The heavy gold Rolex on his wrist suddenly felt like a pair of handcuffs. Brittany, you need to calm down, Terrence stammered, backing away from his father-in-law. The market has been incredibly slow. I had to move some funds around temporarily just to keep us afloat. I was going to pay it all back. You stole client money to buy a Rolex, Richard bellowed, advancing on his son-in-law. You stole money to buy designer suits while living rent-free in a house my daughter was paying for. You are not a provider. You are a broke, pathetic criminal. Terrence felt his fragile ego shatter, and his defense mechanism instantly switched to vicious aggression. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Brittany. Do not you dare stand there and judge me. How do you think I paid for your ridiculous lifestyle, Brittany? You maxed out 4 premium credit cards in 90 days. You demanded luxury vacations and designer bags every single week. You bled me completely dry. I had to dip into the escrow accounts because you refused to live within our actual means. You are blaming me, Brittany cried, bursting into hysterical tears. You are a fraud. You told me you were wealthy. I married a successful broker, not a common thief. You lied to my entire family. Linda collapsed onto the sofa, wailing loudly. We are ruined, she sobbed. My daughter is married to a felon. The house is gone. The cars are gone. We are completely destroyed. Richard grabbed Terrence by the collar of his expensive stolen suit. Get out of my house! Richard screamed, shoving the younger man toward the foyer. Get out before I call the police myself and hand you over to the Financial Crimes Unit. I do not have anywhere to go, Terrence shouted back, batting Richard's hands away. My accounts are frozen. The board locked my assets this morning. I am staying right here. The living room devolved into a massive, chaotic war zone. Richard and Terrence were screaming in each other's faces, throwing devastating insults and blaming one another for their financial ruin. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, mourning her dead social status, while Linda sat paralyzed with the realization that her golden child was legally tied to a soon-to-be convicted felon. The perfect elite family image they had spent decades cultivating was entirely obliterated in a matter of minutes. I reached out and muted the audio feed. I leaned back in my chair and looked at Cameron, who was shaking his head in sheer awe at the magnitude of their implosion. They were no longer focused on me. They were completely consumed by the fire they had started themselves. And the best part was yet to come. The grand finale of their destruction was scheduled for this upcoming weekend, and they had absolutely no idea they were already on the guest list. 48 hours after the explosive confrontation in the living room, Terrence found himself backed into a desperate corner. The state licensing board had officially frozen his bank accounts, and the threat of federal prison for wire fraud was looming heavily over his head. A cornered rat will always bite, and Terrence was a master of deflecting his own failures onto anyone else. He locked himself in the guest bedroom with his laptop, frantically searching for any possible financial lifeline. He began digging into the corporate registration of Apex Horizon Holdings, the company that had just issued their eviction notice. Because he was a real estate broker, he knew exactly how to navigate public property records and corporate shell structures. It took him less than a day to follow the digital paper trail. He linked the registered agent of the property management firm directly to my corporate legal counsel. From there, he traced the public filings straight to the parent organization Vertex Financial Technologies. When Terrence pulled up the latest financial publications and saw the public valuation of my company, his absolute desperation instantly mutated into bottomless greed. The sheer magnitude of my $60 million enterprise stared back at him from the glowing screen. Terrence printed the corporate summaries and marched back down to the living room where Richard, Linda, and Brittany were sitting in a state of depressed, terrified silence. The reality of their impending homelessness had finally settled over them. Terrence slammed the thick stack of papers onto the glass coffee table. His earlier humiliation over his criminal charges was completely gone, replaced by a manic, aggressive energy. You all need to stop crying and look at this right now. Terrence announced, his voice vibrating with frantic excitement. "We are not losing this house. We are not going bankrupt. We are about to become incredibly wealthy, and your deceitful daughter is going to pay for every single thing we want." Richard looked up slowly, his face pale and exhausted. "What are you talking about, Terrence? We are ruined. You ruined us with your escrow theft. Do not focus on my minor accounting errors." Richard Terrence dismissed, waving his hand arrogantly. "I was just moving funds around to survive. Madeline committed the real crime here. She committed egregious familial financial fraud. Look at these documents. Your daughter is not a mistress. She is not a fake executive. She is the sole founder and chief executive officer of a financial technology firm worth over $60 million. She owns the company outright." Linda snatched the papers off the table, her eyes darting across the printed articles and financial breakdowns. Her hands began to shake, not from shock, but from a sudden intense surge of entitlement. $60 million, Linda whispered, her eyes widening. She has $60 million, and she refused to give her own sister $25,000 for a vacation. Terrence paced around the living room, leaning fully into his slick salesman persona. "Exactly, Linda. She is a sociopath. But here is the most important part. She built this entire empire while living under your roof. She started this company 4 years ago. She used your electricity, your internet, your food, and your structural support to launch a multi-million-dollar corporation. She intentionally hid this generational wealth from her own parents while watching you struggle with a foreclosure. That is not just disrespectful. From a legal standpoint, she unlawfully concealed marital and familial assets." The pseudo-legal jargon Terrence was spouting was completely absurd. It held absolutely zero weight in any real court of law, but to a room full of desperate narcissists, it sounded like a golden ticket. Richard and Linda lacked any basic understanding of corporate law, so they swallowed the lie perfectly. It gave them exactly what they needed: a villain to blame and a justification for their bottomless greed. "She deceived this entire family," Richard roared, slamming his fist against the armrest of the sofa. His patriarchal pride reinflated instantly. "I provided the foundation for her success. I allowed her to live here rent-free so she could build this technology firm. That company was built with our resources. That money should have been used to support her parents and fund my retirement. She stole our generational wealth." Brittany stopped wiping her tears and suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes gleamed with a predatory excitement. "Does this mean we can sue her, Terrence? Can we take her money and get my car back?" "We can do a lot more than get your car back, Brittany." Terrence smirked, adjusting his tie as if he was already a billionaire. "We have the right to sue her for 50% of the entire company. We will file a massive lawsuit for financial abandonment and equitable distribution of household assets. We will threaten to drag her corporate reputation through the mud right before her company goes public. She will be terrified of the bad press. She will settle out of court and hand us a check for $30 million just to make us go away. I will manage the legal strategy myself." Linda clapped her hands together, a disturbing smile stretching across her face. "Yes. We will take half of everything she owns. She owes us for the emotional distress she caused. We will buy a larger estate in Connecticut, and Terrence can use the settlement money to clear up his little misunderstanding with the real estate board. We are going to be rich, Richard. Madeline will finally serve her purpose." Sitting in my secure home office in the Hamptons, I watched the entire living room conspiracy unfold through my encrypted security feed. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. They were literally sitting in a house they did not own, facing federal fraud charges and a looming eviction, yet they were actively plotting to steal half of a $60 million corporation based on completely fabricated legal theories. Cameron appeared on my secondary monitor, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "I have seen a lot of greedy relatives in my career," Madeline Cameron noted, his voice laced with professional revulsion. "But your brother-in-law takes the prize. He is trying to extort a corporate chief executive officer with the legal equivalent of monopoly money rules. If he actually files that frivolous lawsuit, I will personally have him sanctioned for malicious prosecution. Let them dream, Cameron, I replied, resting my hands on my desk. Let them inflate their egos and plan their imaginary billionaire lifestyles. The higher they climb into this delusion, the harder the impact will be when they hit the concrete. Terrence thinks he is a master manipulator. He thinks he can back me into a corner with threats of bad press. What is your next move? Cameron asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled, turning my attention back to the security feed where Terrence was happily detailing the luxury cars he planned to buy with my money. We let them make the first move, I instructed. Terrence is going to reach out to me. He is going to demand a meeting to present his ridiculous extortion demands. When he does, we will roll out the red carpet. We are going to invite them to the most exclusive event of their lives, and then we are going to burn their entire world to ashes in front of an audience. The meeting took place exactly 24 hours later at a sleek glass-enclosed coffee shop in the heart of the financial district. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner booth that offered a clear view of the entrance. I sat with a pristine cup of black coffee, waiting for the rats to finally take the bait. At exactly 2 o'clock, the heavy glass doors pushed open. Linda and Terrence walked in. They tried desperately to project an aura of absolute wealth and elite status, but their underlying panic was palpable. Linda wore an oversized designer trench coat, clearly trying to hide her nervous posture. Terrence strutted beside her wearing a sharp navy blue suit that I knew he bought on a credit card he could no longer pay off. He scanned the room with a look of extreme arrogance, completely ignoring the fact that his real estate license was currently hanging by a thread. They marched over and sat down across from me without asking for permission. Linda immediately assumed her role as the deeply wounded matriarch. She placed her designer handbag on the table like a weapon. I hope you realize how incredibly generous we are being by agreeing to meet with you today, Madeline. She began, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Your father is still completely devastated by your deceit. You lied to us for 4 years. You hid a $60 million enterprise while watching your own family suffer. The psychological damage you inflicted on your sister is completely unforgivable. I took a slow sip of my coffee, keeping my face completely devoid of emotion. I am not here to discuss my sister's fragile feelings, Linda. You demanded this meeting. State your business. Terrence aggressively leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. He clearly wanted to dominate the physical space. Let me take over from here, Linda. Terrence announced, his voice dropping into a fake authoritative corporate register. I have been doing a lot of intensive market research, Madeline. I know exactly what Vertex Financial Technologies is worth. I also know that you are currently preparing for a massive initial public offering next quarter. You are planning to take the company public and cash out hundreds of millions of dollars. He paused, waiting for me to look terrified. I simply stared back at him, unblinking. I am a professional businessman, Madeline. Terrence continued, adjusting his fake Rolex to make sure the cafe lighting caught the gold bezel. I understand how corporate acquisitions and family equity work. You built that company while living under Richard's roof. You utilized familial resources to launch a tech startup. Legally speaking, that entitles this family to a massive chunk of your equity. But because we are reasonable people, we are willing to offer you a highly discounted settlement. I tilted my head slightly. A settlement? For what exactly? For financial abandonment and equitable distribution. Terrence stated confidently, using legal terms he clearly pulled from a quick internet search. Here is our absolute ultimatum, Madeline. You are going to wire $2 million in untraceable cash into a secure offshore account by Friday. Furthermore, you are going to draft an official employment contract naming me the Chief Commercial Officer of Vertex Financial Technologies. I have the sales background and the aggressive networking skills your little tech company desperately needs to scale globally. Plus, putting me on the executive board will legitimize your brand before the initial public offering. Linda nodded enthusiastically, entirely intoxicated by the sheer delusion of his demands. It is the absolute least you can do, Madeline. $2 million is pocket change for a company of your size. It will pay off your sister's debts, upgrade our living situation, and allow Terrence to clear up that massive misunderstanding with the real estate licensing board. And giving him an executive position keeps the wealth inside the family where it belongs. I gave you the intelligence to build that company. Every ounce of your success exists because I provided the foundational environment for your brain to develop. If you agree to this, we will forgive your disgusting behavior and allow you to attend family holidays again. I looked at my mother and my brother-in-law. The sheer audacity was truly mesmerizing. You want $2 million and a C-suite executive position for a man who is currently facing federal wire fraud charges? I asked, my tone perfectly flat. Terrence slammed his hand flat against the table, causing my coffee cup to rattle. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glaring at the surrounding tables. "Those charges are completely fabricated and you know it. But let us talk about what happens if you refuse our incredibly generous offer. If you do not wire that money and sign that employment contract, I am going to completely destroy your initial public offering." Terrence leaned in so close I could smell the stale mints on his breath. "I will personally contact every major financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. I will file an official complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I will tell them that the founder of Vertex Financial Technologies committed massive elder financial abuse. I will say you stole your parents' retirement funds to illegally secure your startup capital. Investors hate scandals, Madeline. Wall Street hates messy family litigation. The moment I leak those fabricated documents, your corporate valuation will completely tank. Your board of directors will force you out of your own company to save the stock price. You will lose absolutely everything." Linda crossed her arms, tightly leaning back with a victorious smirk. "We will not hesitate to ruin you, Madeline. You owe us your life and your success." I already drafted the emails for Terrence to send to the whistleblower division. One click and your entire life burns to the ground. You will sign the contract and pay the $2 million, or we will drag your name through the mud until you are begging us for a job. The choice is entirely yours." I sat in absolute silence, watching them sweat under their fake confidence. They were handing me a documented extortion attempt in a public place. They thought they held all the power. They had no idea they had just walked directly into a steel trap. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I sat completely still, letting their hollow threats hang in the air of the coffee shop. Terrence was practically vibrating with nervous energy, his knuckles white, as he gripped the edge of the table. Linda was breathing heavily, her eyes darting around to see if anyone had overheard their blackmail attempt. They expected me to crumble. They expected tears and a desperate plea for mercy. Instead, I let a slow, sharp smile spread across my face. It was a smile entirely devoid of warmth. It was the smile of an apex predator watching its prey willingly step into a steel trap. "You want $2 million and a position on my executive board?" I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. Terrence puffed out his chest, attempting to look physically imposing. "That is the absolute minimum, Madeline. You sign the contract or your company burns." I reached into my structured leather tote bag. I bypassed the hidden recording device that had just captured their entire felony extortion attempt in crystal clear, high-definition audio. My hand wrapped around a thick, heavy envelope made of premium matte black cardstock. It was sealed with a gold wax stamp bearing the official crest of Vertex Financial Technologies. I pulled the envelope out and placed it gently onto the center of the glass table. Linda stared at the envelope as if it were a literal brick of gold. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice tight with uncontrollable greed. "That is a very exclusive all-access pass," I replied, sliding it toward her perfectly manicured hands. "This Saturday night, Vertex Financial Technologies is hosting our annual corporate charity gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel. It is the most prestigious networking event on the East Coast. Every major venture capitalist, hedge fund manager, and Tier 1 media outlet will be in attendance. We are celebrating our upcoming initial public offering." Terrence stared at the gold wax seal, his eyes wide with profound hunger. Why are you giving this to us? Because if you want to become the chief commercial officer of a $60 million enterprise, you need to be introduced to the board of directors properly, I stated effortlessly, feeding his massive delusions of grandeur. You want the wealth. You want the status. You want to be recognized as a powerful corporate titan. Then you should claim your prize in front of an audience. Linda snatched the envelope off the table, clutching it to her chest. Are you saying you agree to our terms, Madeline? Are you finally doing the right thing for your family? I looked directly into her eyes. I am saying that we will resolve this entire situation on Saturday night. Bring Richard. Bring Brittany. Bring whatever cut-rate lawyer you want to hire. We will have a private executive suite reserved for us above the ballroom. We will sit down and we will execute the final documents to completely sever this conflict once and for all. Everything you deserve will be handed directly to you. The sheer level of manipulation was intoxicating. I was feeding them exactly what their narcissistic brains craved. They heard the word surrender. I meant total annihilation. Terrence leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms with an expression of supreme arrogant victory. I knew you would see reason, Madeline. You are a smart girl. You know you cannot fight a real businessman. I will have my legal counsel draft the employment contracts and the non-disclosure agreements regarding your little familial fraud. Make sure your wire transfer protocols are ready by Saturday night. We will celebrate your new reality. I assured him, my voice laced with a lethal calmness. Dress appropriately. The cameras will be everywhere. Linda stood up abruptly, her face flushed with euphoric triumph. She looked down at me with the same condescending sneer she had used my entire life. I always knew you needed a strong masculine presence to guide your business, Madeline. Terrence will fix your company, and do not think you can back out of this. We will be there on Saturday. They turned and marched out of the coffee shop, their postures completely transformed. They practically floated out the door, radiating the toxic energy of people who believed they had just conquered the world. I remained in my booth, watching them through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. As soon as they hit the sidewalk, Linda pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, likely calling Brittany to announce their massive victory. Terrence hailed a cab, waving his hand with exaggerated importance. I knew exactly where they were heading. They were heading to the luxury boutiques on Fifth Avenue. They firmly believed they were about to be multimillionaires. They were going to buy custom Italian tuxedos and silk designer evening gowns to wear to my gala. I picked up my phone and dialed Cameron. He answered immediately. They took the bait, I announced, watching their cab merge into the busy city traffic. They took it completely. They actually think they successfully extorted me. They are coming to the gala on Saturday night to claim their $2 million and an executive suite. Cameron let out a low, appreciative whistle over the line. Their sheer stupidity is almost a medical marvel. I assume they are currently on their way to max out whatever credit lines they have left. Let them swipe the cards, I instructed, my eyes tracking the cab until it disappeared. Let them buy the absolute most expensive outfits they can find. Delay the final credit freeze on Brittany's secondary accounts by exactly 48 hours. Let them dig the hole as deep as humanly possible. I want them walking into my gala wearing $20,000 worth of clothing they can never pay for. It is the perfect setup. Cameron agreed, the sound of his keyboard clicking rapidly in the background. The local authorities have already confirmed the arrest warrant for Terrence based on our embezzlement evidence. The Financial Crimes Unit is fully briefed. We have plainclothes officers ready to integrate with your private security detail at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Make sure the eviction notice for the Connecticut house is finalized and printed on heavy premium paper I ordered, picking up my coffee cup. I am going to hand it to my father personally. I want the cameras rolling when they realize the trap has snapped shut. We have a completely airtight operation, Madeline, Cameron assured me. By Sunday morning, Terrence will be sitting in a federal holding cell. Brittany will be entirely bankrupt, and your parents will be officially homeless. They wanted to play high-stakes corporate warfare. We are going to show them how the house always wins. I ended the call and took a final sip of my coffee. The bitter dark roast tasted absolutely exquisite. I had endured decades of psychological abuse, endless financial exploitation, and profound emotional cruelty. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought they had backed me into a corner with their pathetic little blackmail scheme. They were about to walk into a room filled with the most powerful people on the eastern seaboard. They were going to demand a throne. Instead, I was going to hand them a prison sentence and a total financial execution. The stage was perfectly set. The invitations were delivered. The gates of hell were officially open, and my family was sprinting inside with a massive smile. The Grand Plaza Hotel was a fortress of gilded opulence on Saturday night. Crystal chandeliers the size of small vehicles cast a brilliant golden light across the grand ballroom. A symphony orchestra played softly in the corner, while the absolute elite of the East Coast financial sector mingled over imported caviar and vintage champagne. I stood behind the one-way glass of the mezzanine executive suite, looking down at the massive crowd. My earpiece buzzed with a quiet update from my head of security. The targets had officially entered the building. I watched the main entrance monitors as my family strode through the heavy brass doors. They had absolutely outdone themselves in the worst possible way. They stepped out of a rented, stretched limousine that I knew for a fact Terrence had put on a premium credit card that was literally hours away from being permanently frozen. Brittany was wearing an obscenely flashy, sequined evening gown that screamed desperation rather than elegance. Linda was draped in heavy jewelry, holding her head impossibly high, as if she were royalty gracing the peasants with her presence. Richard wore a stiff tuxedo, attempting to project the image of a seasoned corporate patriarch. Terrence flanked them wearing a custom-tailored velvet jacket, shooting his cuffs to proudly display his fraudulent gold Rolex. They walked into the gala with the toxic, unearned confidence of people who believed they had just successfully blackmailed a multi-million-dollar enterprise. They had no idea they were walking directly into a perfectly synchronized financial slaughterhouse. As they descended the grand staircase into the main ballroom, their greed became visibly intoxicating. Linda's eyes darted hungrily across the room, taking in the ice sculptures, the towering floral arrangements, and the presence of prominent Wall Street executives. Instead of feeling intimidated by the sheer magnitude of the wealth surrounding them, their narcissistic delusion simply absorbed it. In their minds, this entire empire was already theirs. They believed they were the rightful owners of my success. I watched through the camera feed as Terrence immediately began asserting his imaginary authority. He flagged down a passing waiter, snapping his fingers aggressively in the young man's face. The waiter stopped, offering a silver tray of premium champagne flutes. Terrence picked up a glass, inspected it with a theatrical sneer, and shoved it back onto the tray so roughly that the liquid spilled over the edge. "Bring me the reserve bottles," Terrence ordered, his voice booming loudly enough to draw annoyed glances from a nearby group of hedge fund managers. "Do not serve me this standard trash. I am joining the executive board of this company tonight. I expect top-tier service from the staff. Move quickly before I have you written up." The waiter maintained his professional composure, nodded silently, and walked away. Brittany immediately chimed in, leaning against Terrence and laughing loudly. "You really have to train the staff here better, Terrence," she mocked deliberately, dropping her designer clutch onto a pristine cocktail table and expecting another server to pick it up for her. "Madeline clearly has no idea how to manage high-end hospitality. It is a good thing we are here to take over. This place needs a complete overhaul." Richard and Linda were busy attempting to network with a circle of venture capitalists near the ice sculpture. I tuned into their audio feed via the ballroom's security microphones. Richard was enthusiastically shaking hands, presenting himself as the brilliant mind behind my company. "Yes, my daughter Madeline is the founder," Richard boasted loudly to a completely bewildered investment banker. "But of course, she utilized my business acumen to get the operation off the ground. We are stepping in tonight to restructure her executive team. My son-in-law Terrence is taking over the commercial division. We are going to bring some real masculine leadership to this firm before the initial public offering." The investment banker offered a tight, uncomfortable smile and quickly excused himself clearly, recognizing the profound lack of professionalism radiating from my father. They were embarrassing themselves on a spectacular level, but their egos blinded them to the reality of the room. After severely alienating several groups of industry professionals, the family decided it was time to find me. They wanted to corner me before the main event. They wanted to gloat. I watched them march across the ballroom floor, heading directly toward the VIP velvet ropes that guarded the perimeter of the main presentation stage. Linda pointed her manicured finger toward the heavily guarded access point. "She is probably hiding back there, completely terrified," Linda announced to her husband. "Let us go collect our $2 million wire transfer and get that employment contract signed. I want to see the look on her face when she officially hands over the power." They approached the VIP access point with aggressive entitlement. Terrence took the lead, attempting to push right past the thick velvet ropes. He did not even bother to look at the massive private security guards flanking the entrance. "Step aside, gentlemen," Terrence commanded, waving his hand dismissively. "We are the VIP guests of honor. I am the incoming Chief Commercial Officer. We are here for our private meeting with Madeline." Two heavily built security contractors immediately stepped forward, forming an impenetrable human wall of solid muscle and tailored black suits. They did not speak. They simply crossed their arms and stared down at Terrence. "Did you not hear me?" Terrence snapped, his voice rising in anger as his fragile ego was challenged in front of his wife. "I said move out of the way. We are executives. We belong back there." The head of security, a towering man named David, looked Terrence dead in the eyes. "I am sorry," Sir David stated, his voice a low, freezing rumble. "This area is strictly off limits to general attendees. You are not on the executive access list." Brittany pushed her way to the front, her face flushed with hysterical indignation. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she shrieked, pointing at the guard. "Madeline is my sister. We basically own this company. If you do not let us through right now, Terrence will fire you on the spot." David did not even blink. "My orders come directly from the Chief Executive Officer, madam. You are instructed to remain exactly where you are." Richard stepped up, trying to use his booming patriarchal voice. "This is absolutely outrageous. Go tell Madeline that her father is waiting here. Tell her to come out and face us right now." I smiled, tapping my earpiece. "Hold them right there, at the edge of the stage." David Y instructed, my voice, calm and completely lethal. "Do not let them move a single inch. They have the absolute best seats in the house for the main event." "Understood, ma'am," David replied softly, touching his own earpiece. My family stood trapped at the very front of the crowd, fuming with humiliated rage. They were completely blocked from entering the safe haven of the backstage area, perfectly pinned against the velvet ropes. The bright stage lights began to power up, illuminating their angry, panicked faces. They thought they were about to privately extort a weak, terrified woman in a back room. They had no idea the grand curtain was about to rise, and the entire financial world was about to watch their absolute destruction. The tension at the velvet ropes reached a boiling point. Richard was not a man who accepted rejection lightly, especially not from hired help. His face turned a deep shade of crimson as he looked around the grand ballroom. He saw the wealthy attendees mingling, laughing, and completely ignoring his patriarchal authority. The sheer indignity of being treated like a commoner in what he believed was his daughter's empire pushed him over the edge. He spotted a secondary podium set up just a few yards away from the VIP ropes intended for the charity auction announcements later in the evening. A wireless microphone rested on the sleek acrylic stand. Richard forcefully shoved his way past a group of startled hedge fund managers and marched directly toward it. Linda followed closely behind him, a smug smile stretching across her face. She firmly believed her husband was about to take absolute control of the room and demand the respect their family deserved. Terrence and Brittany watched with eager anticipation, entirely convinced that Richard was about to publicly secure their $2 million extortion payment. Richard grabbed the microphone and tapped it aggressively. The sharp thud echoed through the massive ballroom speakers, instantly silencing the symphony orchestra and halting every conversation in the room. Hundreds of elite investors, tech billionaires, and media tycoons turned their attention toward the red-faced man standing awkwardly at the side podium. "Excuse me," Richard boomed into the microphone, his voice carrying the harsh, demanding tone he used to terrorize our household for decades. "I need everyone to listen to me right now. I am Richard, the father of the woman running this company. My family and I were invited here tonight as executive guests of honor. We are stepping in to restructure the leadership of Vertex Financial Technologies. My son-in-law Terrence is taking over commercial operations, and we demand that Madeline comes out here to formally execute our contracts immediately. We will not be kept waiting behind a velvet rope like common strangers." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and deafening. The billionaires and venture capitalists stared at Richard not with awe or respect, but with profound clinical bewilderment. They looked at his outdated tuxedo. They looked at Linda's cheap, flashy jewelry. They looked at Brittany's desperate sequined dress and Terrence's fake gold Rolex. The elite crowd instantly recognized exactly what they were looking at. They were looking at a group of arrogant, delusional parasites trying to hijack a multi-million-dollar corporate event. Richard mistook the stunned silence for submission. He gripped the microphone tighter, puffing out his chest. Madeline Richard shouted into the sound system, demanding obedience. "You get out here right now and face your family. You owe us your success, and we are here to collect. Do not embarrass us any further." Terrence smirked, adjusting his tie and stepping forward to bask in the stolen spotlight. He truly thought the room was intimidated by their presence. Then the entire atmosphere of the ballroom shifted in a fraction of a second. The main stage lights suddenly went completely black, plunging the front of the room into darkness. A low, resonant bass note vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the crystal champagne flutes on the cocktail tables. The massive panoramic LED screens spanning the entire width of the main stage flared to life with blinding brilliance. A sleek, high-definition visualization of the Vertex Financial Technologies logo materialized on the screens, rotating above real-time global market data. The visual display was a breathtaking demonstration of absolute corporate dominance. The audio feed from Richard's microphone was abruptly and forcefully severed by the main control booth. He tapped it frantically, but only dead silence responded. His artificial power was instantly terminated. A new voice sliced through the pristine acoustic system of the ballroom. It was calm, lethal, and completely authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cameron announced, his voice echoing from the hidden stage speakers. Cameron stepped out from the shadows of the stage wings and walked directly into the center spotlight. He wore a flawless, bespoke midnight blue suit. He projected the ruthless, polished energy of a man who destroyed corporate empires before breakfast. He completely ignored Richard and my family, leaving them standing in the dark periphery like discarded trash. Cameron addressed the sea of elite investors with a charismatic, predatory smile. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating the unprecedented growth of Vertex Financial Technologies," Cameron declared, looking across the ocean of wealthy attendees. "We are celebrating the visionary mind that built this $60 million enterprise from the ground up entirely on her own. She disrupted the global financial sector. She revolutionized cybersecurity. And she did it all without a single drop of outside help." The crowd erupted into spontaneous, eager applause. The venture capitalists and hedge fund managers leaned forward, hanging on his every word. Richard, Linda, Brittany, and Terrence stood frozen behind the velvet ropes, their faces draining of all color. The terrifying reality of the situation was finally beginning to penetrate their narcissistic delusions. "It is my profound honor to introduce the sole founder, the visionary, and the chief executive officer of Vertex Financial Technologies," Cameron announced, raising his hand toward the center of the massive LED display. "Please welcome Madeline." The screens parted mechanically, sliding open to reveal the center stage. The spotlight shifted instantly. I stepped out into the blinding light. I did not look like the broken, exhausted accountant they had kicked out into the rain. I wore a tailored crimson power dress that commanded absolute respect. My hair was impeccably styled, and my posture radiated the untouchable confidence of a self-made titan. I walked to the center of the stage, the heels of my designer shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished floorboards. The entire grand ballroom exploded. Hundreds of billionaires, banking executives, and industry partners rose to their feet in a massive, synchronized standing ovation. The applause was deafening, shaking the very foundation of the hotel. They were clapping for me. They were honoring my genius, my resilience, and my absolute power. I stood at the podium and let the roaring applause wash over me. I slowly turned my gaze toward the VIP boundary. I looked directly down at my family. They were completely paralyzed. Richard was staring up at me with his mouth hanging open, the dead microphone slipping from his trembling hand and clattering onto the floor. Linda looked as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of her lungs, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Brittany was physically shaking her hands, covering her mouth, as the true scale of my wealth finally crushed her fake socialite reality. Terrence looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine, his arrogant smirk entirely wiped from his sweating face. They were staring up at a god. They had come to extort a frightened victim. Instead, they found themselves standing at the feet of a corporate giant, while the most powerful people in the country bowed to her. They were absolute nobodies in my kingdom, and the look of sheer soul-crushing realization on their pale faces was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The thunderous applause continued to roll through the grand ballroom, but I raised my hand in a gesture of quiet authority. The room immediately silenced. Billionaires and media moguls held their breath, waiting for my opening address. I adjusted the microphone on the podium and looked out over the sea of faces. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. Vertex Financial Technologies represents the pinnacle of security and transparency. But before we discuss our corporate future, I have a very minor piece of housekeeping to attend to with some unexpected guests. I stepped away from the podium. The spotlight followed me as I descended the velvet-lined stairs of the main stage. The crowd parted respectfully, creating a wide path directly toward the VIP boundary. Cameron walked exactly one step behind me, holding a sleek black leather portfolio. As I approached the velvet ropes, David and his security team stepped back just enough to give me direct access to my family. They looked entirely pathetic. The arrogant glow they had carried into the hotel was completely extinguished. Richard tried to swallow, but his throat was visibly dry. He looked at the floor, then up at the towering security guards, then finally at me. "Madeline," he croaked, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Madeline, what is this? What is going on?" Linda grabbed the velvet rope, her knuckles white. "Sweetheart," she whispered, attempting to force a terrified, trembling smile onto her face. "You look absolutely stunning. We knew it. We always knew you were destined for greatness. We are so proud of our daughter." I did not smile back. I did not soften my gaze. I looked at the woman who had demanded I drain my life savings for a vacation, and I felt nothing but supreme clinical disgust. "Do not ever call me your daughter again, Linda." I stated, my voice low but carrying enough acoustic weight that the nearby hedge fund managers could hear every single word. "You lost the right to use that title the moment you threw me out into a freezing storm and told me I was dead weight." Brittany shrunk back behind Terrence, trying to make herself invisible in her cheap sequined dress. Terrence was sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the exit doors as if calculating his chances of escaping the building. I held out my hand. Cameron placed the black leather portfolio into my palm. I opened it and pulled out a heavy cream-colored document embossed with the official seal of the State of Connecticut Housing Authority. I held the document out toward my father. "Take it, Richard," I commanded. Richard raised a shaking hand and took the thick paper. He stared at the bold black letters printed across the top. That is an official and immediate eviction notice, I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the surrounding crowd. It is completely legally binding and effectively terminates your occupancy at the Connecticut estate. You have exactly 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from my property. If you leave so much as a single scratch on the hardwood floors, my corporate attorneys will sue you for property damage. Linda let out a strangled gasp, clutching her heavy fake jewelry. Madeline, you cannot do this in front of all these people. You are humiliating us. We are a respectable family. We are high society. You are a complete fraud, Linda. I corrected her, stepping closer so she could fully absorb her destruction. You are not high society. You are a bankrupt tenant who has been living on my charity for the past 4 years. The surrounding executives began to whisper among themselves, pointing at my parents. The social execution was happening in real time. Let us clear the air and tell your venture capitalist friends the truth. I continued, projecting my voice effortlessly. 4 years ago, Richard destroyed your family finances with terrible investments. The bank foreclosed on your precious suburban mansion. You were weeks away from living in a motel. You were terrified that your country club friends would find out you were broke. So my holding company, Apex Horizons, stepped in. I bought the deed from the bank in cash. I allowed you to stay there, and I subsidized 80% of your rent just to protect your fragile, pathetic egos. Richard stared at the eviction notice, a single bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. He could not speak. His entire identity as a successful provider was being publicly slaughtered. For 4 years, I paid for the roof over your head. I told them, my eyes locked onto Richard's defeated face. I paid the property taxes. I paid the maintenance fees. I paid the landscaping bills so Linda could host her garden parties and pretend she was wealthy. I dressed in cheap clothes and pretended to be a struggling accountant because I knew if you discovered my actual net worth, you would bleed me dry. I hid a $60 million enterprise just to survive your endless greed. Brittany finally found her voice, though it was weak and trembling. You lied to us, Madeline. You made us think you were a failure. No, Brittany, I replied, turning my freezing gaze to my sister. I simply let you believe what you desperately wanted to believe. You needed me to be a failure so you could feel superior. You needed someone to look down on. You maxed out credit cards and leased a luxury Porsche you could not afford, all while mocking the very person who was secretly keeping you off the streets. Linda reached out over the velvet rope, trying to grab my arm. Madeline, please, she begged, tears ruining her heavy makeup. We made a mistake. We were stressed. We did not mean what we said the other night. We love you. We are family. You cannot throw us out into the street. We have nowhere to go. You have the $2 million extortion payment you came here to collect, I reminded her loudly. Oh, wait. That was a completely fabricated delusion constructed by your fraudulent son-in-law. You came to my corporate gala tonight expecting to blackmail a helpless victim. You walked in here intending to steal my equity and demand a seat on my board of directors. You thought you were the apex predators. I leaned in close enough for Linda to see her own terrified reflection in my eyes. You are not predators, Linda. You are parasites. And I am officially cutting off the host body. The eviction stands. You will vacate the premises by Monday morning, or the county sheriff will physically drag you out onto the curb. Richard crumpled the eviction notice in his fist, his chest heaving with defeated rage. You planned this, he hissed. You brought us here just to destroy us in front of these people. I brought you here to show you exactly what a real failure looks like, I stated, my voice ringing with finality. It looks exactly like you, Richard. I took a step back, adjusting my crimson dress and handing the empty portfolio back to Cameron. The first blow had been delivered with absolute flawless precision. The Connecticut house was gone. Their social status was entirely obliterated. The crowd of billionaires stared at my parents with absolute disgust. But the night was not over yet. I turned my attention away from my crying mother and my broken father. I locked my eyes directly onto Terrence. The real estate scammer was currently shifting his weight nervously, looking incredibly pale. It was time to spring the second trap. I locked my eyes directly onto Terrence. The smooth-talking real estate scammer was currently shifting his weight nervously, looking incredibly pale. He tried to swallow, but his throat was clearly completely dry. His Adam's apple bobbed aggressively above his tight collar. He took a subtle step backward, attempting to distance himself from Richard and Linda's spectacular public execution. He desperately wanted the elite crowd to believe he was just a wealthy bystander caught in the crossfire of a messy family dispute. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon that arrogant broker persona, but his dark eyes betrayed pure primal terror. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod to David, my head of security. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom shifted instantly. From the dark shadows of the mezzanine and the perimeter of the catering stations, 6 men and women in impeccably tailored but inconspicuous suits stepped forward. They moved with absolute tactical precision, effortlessly parting the sea of wealthy executives. They did not wear the discreet earpieces of my private security detail. As they approached the velvet ropes, the lead investigator reached into his jacket pocket and let a heavy gold badge fall open against his chest. State Financial Crimes Unit. Terrence gasped, a pathetic strangled sound escaping his throat. He instinctively took another step back toward the exit, but 2 of my massive security guards instantly closed ranks behind him, cutting off his only avenue of escape. Cameron stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the lead investigator. He held a thick blue legal dossier, the culmination of our relentless forensic accounting investigation. Detectives Cameron addressed the officers, his voice carrying effortlessly over the stunned silence of the ballroom. We have compiled a comprehensive and fully documented forensic report regarding the commercial brokerage activities of this individual. Inside this dossier, you will find irrefutable bank statements, forged wire transfers, and verified client complaints proving that he has systematically embezzled earnest money deposits from innocent first-time homebuyers to fund his own personal luxury lifestyle. The investors and tech billionaires surrounding the stage began to murmur in disgust. Financial fraud was the ultimate cardinal sin in this room. They looked at Terrence with absolute revulsion. Terrence raised his shaking hands, his voice cracking violently. "That is a lie. That is a complete setup. Madeline faked those documents. I am a legitimate businessman. I am closing a commercial deal on Friday. You are not closing anything, Terrence," I stated, my voice echoing like a judge handing down a final sentence. "Your real estate license was officially flagged for revocation 48 hours ago. Your professional escrow accounts have been completely frozen by the state board. You are entirely bankrupt." Linda let out another piercing shriek, clutching her husband's arm as the reality of her golden son-in-law's criminal status finally registered. But Cameron was not finished. He opened the blue dossier, pulling out a separate stack of heavily redacted bank applications. He looked directly at Brittany, who was currently trembling violently in her cheap sequined dress. "Actually, embezzlement is not even the most severe charge on the table tonight," Cameron announced, a lethal smirk playing on his lips. When Terrence realized the state licensing board was actively investigating his stolen escrow funds, he panicked. He needed a massive influx of untraceable liquidity to cover his tracks and pay back the missing deposits. But his own credit score was completely destroyed. So he utilized the personal identifying information of his own wife. Brittany froze, her tear-streaked face turning an alarming shade of gray. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "Your loving husband stole your social security number," Brittany Cameron declared, delivering the fatal blow. "He forged your signature on multiple high-risk financial applications. He leveraged your clean credit history to take out a $500,000 loan from a network of predatory high-interest lenders. He took the cash, spent a portion on luxury items like that fake gold Rolex currently on his wrist, and lost the rest trying to cover his fraudulent tracks." The air was completely sucked out of the room. "You are currently carrying $500,000 in toxic debt," Brittany, I explained, looking down at my sister with absolute zero pity. You do not own a Porsche. You do not own a house. You own a $500,000 financial anchor, and your husband wrapped the chain directly around your neck. Terence shook his head frantically, his eyes darting wildly. It was a temporary bridge loan. He stammered his facade, entirely crumbling into pathetic desperation. I was going to pay it back. I am the provider. I was protecting the family. The lead investigator stepped right up to the velvet rope. You have the right to remain silent. You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft. Two armed officers moved swiftly past the barricade. They grabbed Terence by the arms, spinning him around roughly. The heavy metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed sharply across the quiet ballroom. Terence did not fight back. His shoulders slumped, his head hanging low as the officers marched him away in front of the most powerful financial titans in the country. The fake gold Rolex clinked uselessly against the cold steel of the handcuffs. Brittany watched her husband being marched toward the exit. The monumental weight of her destruction finally crashed down on her fragile, narcissistic reality. She had no car. She had no house. Her husband was a felon heading to federal prison. She was personally buried under $500,000 of predatory debt that she could never hope to repay. Her fake elite socialite status had been violently stripped away, leaving her with absolutely nothing but public humiliation. Her legs gave out. Brittany collapsed right there on the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. She dropped to her knees, her sequined dress pooling around her like a deflated balloon. She crawled forward, grabbing the thick velvet rope with both hands, looking up at me with sheer, unfiltered panic. "Madeline, please!" Brittany wailed, tears and mascara streaming down her face in dark, ugly rivers. She was sobbing hysterically, completely abandoning her pride in front of the entire corporate audience. "Please help me. You have to help me. You have $60 million. You can pay off the loan. You can hire lawyers. I am your little sister. I will do anything you want. I will be a good sister. I am so sorry. Please do not leave me with this debt. They will destroy my life. Save me, Madeline." I stood on the edge of the stage looking down at the weeping, pathetic woman gripping the velvet rope. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I did not feel a shred of familial obligation. I looked at Linda and Richard, who were standing frozen in shock, unable to even comfort their beloved golden child because their own lives had just been totally annihilated. I tilted my head, my expression carved from solid ice. "I was kicked out of the house, remember?" I replied, my voice slicing through her hysterical sobbing with absolute freezing precision. Brittany gasped, choking on her own tears as my cold words hit her. "You told me failures have no place in your home," I reminded her, looking at all three of them. "Now you can see exactly how it feels to be thrown out into the cold." I turned my gaze to my head of security. "David," I instructed smoothly. "The trash is starting to smell. Escort these unauthorized guests off my property immediately." "Yes, ma'am," David responded instantly. The towering security guards stepped forward, physically gripping Richard, Linda, and the sobbing Brittany by their arms. They hauled my sister up from her knees and began forcefully marching all three of them backward away from the stage across the grand ballroom floor and straight toward the heavy brass exit doors. The crowd of billionaires simply watched them go, shaking their heads in utter disgust at the pathetic display. Exactly 1 month after the gala, the legal system finished chewing up my brother-in-law and spitting out the remains. Terence stood before a federal judge stripped entirely of his tailored velvet jackets and his fraudulent gold Rolex. He wore a standard-issue bright orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled firmly to his waist. The prosecution presented the massive mountain of evidence Cameron and the Financial Crimes Unit had meticulously compiled. The stolen earnest money deposits, the wire fraud, and the egregious identity theft against his own wife left the defense attorney with absolutely nothing to argue. Terrence tried to use his slick salesman charm on the judge, begging for leniency and claiming he was just an ambitious provider caught in a bad real estate market. The judge did not buy a single word of his pathetic narrative. Terrence was sentenced to 84 months in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. He was additionally ordered to pay full restitution to the clients he had scammed. As the armed bailiffs escorted him out of the courtroom, he looked back at the gallery. He was searching for a sympathetic face, but found absolutely no one. His grand illusion of being a powerful multi-million-dollar real estate broker was permanently buried behind thick iron bars and cold concrete walls. Brittany did not attend her husband's sentencing hearing because she was far too busy fighting her own catastrophic battle for basic survival. The $500,000 debt Terrence had fraudulently anchored to her name was completely insurmountable. The aggressive lenders relentlessly pursued their collections, freezing her personal bank accounts and seizing whatever liquid assets she had left. Brittany was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, completely destroying her credit profile for the next 10 years. She had to sell all her designer handbags, her expensive shoes, and her luxury jewelry just to afford a bottom-tier bankruptcy lawyer. The golden child who had once screamed at me for not paying her Porsche loan was now taking the public city bus. To meet the minimum requirements of her court-ordered repayment plan, Brittany had to secure immediate employment. Having zero marketable skills and a massive gap in her resume, she was rejected from every corporate office she applied to. She eventually secured a job working the graveyard shift at a local 24-hour convenience store. The girl who once mocked my accounting career now spent her nights standing behind a scratched plexiglass counter, wearing a stiff polyester uniform shirt and scanning cheap energy drinks for truck drivers. The sheer humiliation of her new reality completely broke her narcissistic spirit, especially when her former country club friends occasionally walked in to buy gasoline and pretended not to recognize her. My parents fared no better in the aftermath of their spectacular public execution. True to my absolute word, the eviction notice was enforced with flawless legal precision. On a freezing Monday morning, the county sheriff arrived at the Connecticut estate. Richard and Linda were given exactly 30 minutes to gather their remaining personal belongings before the heavy oak doors were permanently locked. They were physically escorted off the heavily manicured property they had falsely claimed as their own for years. With no savings, no retirement funds, and their credit completely ruined by their previous undisclosed foreclosure, they had virtually zero housing options. They were forced to move into a tiny, run-down one-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable industrial neighborhood. The walls were paper-thin, the plumbing constantly leaked, and the radiator rattled aggressively through the night. Linda, who had spent decades hosting elegant garden parties and sipping expensive red wine, now sat on a cheap plastic folding chair in a cramped living room, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. Richard, the man who demanded patriarchal respect and called me a worthless failure, now spent his days aggressively arguing with collection agencies on a prepaid cellular phone. Their massive egos were firmly confined to a miserable 500-square-foot box. But the physical poverty was not their ultimate punishment. The true devastation came from their complete and utter social annihilation. Shortly after the eviction, an anonymous source utilizing a heavily encrypted email server distributed a highly damaging audio file to their entire social network. The file contained the crystal-clear recording of their extortion attempt at the coffee shop. Every single member of their prestigious country club, every aunt, every uncle, and every distant cousin received the unedited audio clip. They heard Linda arrogantly demanding $2 million. They heard Richard's complicit silence. They heard the raw, vicious greed as my family attempted to blackmail their own daughter while plotting to destroy her company. The fallout was instantaneous and absolutely merciless. My parents were formally expelled from their country club by a unanimous vote of the board. Their longtime affluent friends immediately blocked their phone numbers. The extended family created a new group chat, specifically excluding them, refusing to invite them to any future holiday gatherings or weddings. When Linda tried to attend a Sunday service at her local church, the congregation actively avoided her whispering and pointing as she walked down the aisle. The pristine elite reputation they had spent a lifetime carefully cultivating was entirely reduced to ash. They were universally recognized as toxic, greedy parasites who would betray their own flesh and blood for a payout. They had absolutely nobody left to manipulate, and nobody left to blame but themselves. They were entirely alone, trapped in a prison of their own making. The ocean breeze swept across the expansive teakwood balcony of my Hamptons estate, carrying the crisp scent of salt water and absolute victory. It was a flawless Friday evening. Inside the massive glass-walled living room, my executive team was celebrating. The soft ambient lighting reflected off the imported Italian marble floors, and the sound of clinking crystal champagne flutes echoed through the pristine acoustic architecture. I stood alone by the glass railing, looking out at the dark, churning waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The violent storm that had defined my life for 33 years was officially over. The sky above was perfectly clear. Cameron stepped out onto the balcony holding 2 glasses of vintage Dom Perignon. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his face radiating the exhausted but euphoric energy of a man who had just conquered Wall Street. He handed me a delicate crystal flute and leaned against the railing next to me. The final numbers just came in from the underwriting syndicate. Cameron announced, his voice carrying a deep, resonant satisfaction. The initial public offering was a monumental success, Madeline. Institutional investors oversubscribed the allocation by 400% during the international roadshow. When we stood on the balcony and rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange this morning, our shares opened at $42. They closed just 10 minutes ago at $89 a share. Vertex Financial Technologies is no longer a $60 million enterprise. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the icy champagne, letting the crisp bubbles dance on my tongue. What is the new market capitalization? I asked, keeping my gaze fixed on the horizon. Cameron smiled a sharp, predatory grin that perfectly matched the magnitude of our achievement. $750 million. You are officially 3/4 of the way to becoming a billionaire in liquid assets and corporate equity. The financial media is already calling it the most aggressive and brilliant market debut of the fiscal year. We completely crushed their projections and shattered every industry expectation. $750 million. I let the massive number settle into my mind. It was a fortress of untouchable wealth. It was the ultimate barrier between me and the pathetic parasites who shared my bloodline. I had spent my entire youth shrinking myself to fit into their narrow, toxic boxes. I had endured their endless psychological abuse, their relentless financial exploitation, and their horrific favoritism. They had kicked me out into the freezing rain, expecting me to crawl back on my hands and knees, begging for their validation. Instead, I had built an empire that eclipsed their wildest narcissistic delusions. My thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a sharp buzzing sound. Resting on the tempered glass patio table behind me was the cheap decoy phone I had used to maintain my fake accountant persona. I had kept it powered on for the past month, purely out of clinical curiosity, wanting to monitor the final death throes of my former family. The screen illuminated the dark balcony, casting a harsh, artificial glare against the elegant teakwood furniture. I walked over and picked up the device. A text message had just arrived from a number I had not bothered to save in my contacts, but I knew exactly who it was. It was Linda. The message preview scrolled slowly across the cracked screen. Madeline, please. I am begging you. The apartment is freezing and the landlord is threatening to cut the power. Richard cannot find work anywhere because his background check is ruined. Brittany is crying every night before her graveyard shift at the gas station. We have absolutely nothing left. We are starving. I carried you for 9 months, Madeline. You owe me your life. Please forgive your mother. We are family. We need you. I stared at the glowing digital text. 4 years ago, those manipulative words would have triggered a massive panic attack. They would have activated decades of deeply ingrained emotional programming, compelling me to empty my bank accounts to save them from their own catastrophic failures. I would have rushed to their side, apologizing for boundaries I had every right to set. I would have let them bleed me dry all over again. But standing there bathed in the soft, luxurious light of a $750 million victory, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger pulsing through my veins. There was no residual grief weighing down my chest. There was no lingering trauma clouding my judgment. There was only a profound clinical emptiness. Looking at Linda's desperate plea felt exactly like looking at a piece of discarded trash on the sidewalk. It simply did not matter to me anymore. They were not my family. They never were. They were just a biological accident that I had finally managed to surgically remove from my life. I did not type a response. I did not offer them a single syllable of closure or a final dramatic farewell. They did not deserve my words. They did not deserve my anger. They deserved exactly what they had given me for 33 years. Absolute crushing silence. I pressed my thumb against the screen, navigating to the contact settings. With one smooth, effortless motion, I tapped the block caller button. A small prompt asked to confirm if I wanted to permanently restrict this number and erase the conversation history. I pressed confirm without a single millisecond of hesitation. The screen went completely dark, cutting off their access to me forever. I tossed the cheap plastic phone into the nearby stainless steel trash receptacle. The hollow thud signaled the permanent end of an era. The past was officially dead and buried. Cameron watched me walk back to the glass railing, raising his champagne flute. "Is everything handled?" he asked, his tone reflecting absolute professional loyalty. "Everything is perfectly executed," I replied, raising my crystal glass to meet his. "The dead weight has been entirely liquidated." The heavy sliding glass doors opened behind us. The core executive team of Vertex Financial Technologies stepped out onto the expansive balcony. They were laughing, sharing stories of the historic stock market debut, and projecting the vibrant, dynamic energy of people who genuinely respected and valued one another. This was my chosen family. These were the people who had stood by my side during the grueling early days of the startup, who had defended my vision, and who had helped me build an impenetrable corporate fortress. I turned to face them, holding my champagne high in the cool ocean air. The team raised their glasses in unison, their faces glowing with immense pride and shared triumph. To new beginnings, I announced, my voice ringing clear and steady against the sound of the crashing waves. To absolute freedom. To the founder, Cameron echoed, clinking his glass against mine. I took a long, satisfying drink of the vintage champagne. I looked out at the vast, endless ocean one last time. I was Madeline, the chief executive officer of a near-billion-dollar empire. I was brilliant. I was ruthless. I was entirely untouchable. And for the first time in my entire life, I was completely and wonderfully free. The most powerful lesson from this story is that your worth is never determined by people who only love you conditionally. Biological ties do not give anyone the right to abuse, manipulate, or exploit you. Madeline showed us that true strength lies in walking away from toxic environments and refusing to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is closing the door on those who only value you for what they can take. You are allowed to protect your peace, build your own empire, and choose a family that genuinely celebrates your success. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your own experiences with setting boundaries in the comments below.